Brinkwood was not Sherrowford. One might be forgiven for assuming a thin distinction between city and village, if one judged by a map of Sherrowford and its surroundings. The village of Brinkwood, a historic village according to some labels, because it had once been the site of a Roman villa complex, lay only 2 train stops north of Sherrowford Central Station. For the price of a £13 return ticket, the curious traveller could be standing in Brinkwood's own little train station 20 minutes later, beneath the shadow of the Heathland Hills, a stone's throw from 3 pubs, 1 primary school, a secondary school and 6th form, a small Tesco, a regional pork pie manufacturer and a thickly wooded vale beyond the houses. Brinkwood's position on the map suggested a dormitory town for Sherrowford, just a short ride to the edge of the city and a scenic jaunt across open countryside of damp fields full of sad-looking cows. A little outpost of the English rural idyll. But maps and numbers are only descriptions, they are never the territory. It was a minor miracle that Brinkwood Station had survived mothballing at all, let alone still saw regular service. If one did wish to actually alight there, one had to catch exactly the right kind of train. Most of the higher-speed trains were diverted around the older tracks entirely. 3 and 4 simply went straight past the tiny village platform at full speed, leaving the inattentive would-be rural explorer stranded high and dry in Manchester several stops later. And Brinkwood's train platform was so short it could only serve the front 2 carriages. If you weren't standing in the right part of the train when it drew to a halt, you would find yourself once again whisked off to parts unknown as the rotting ex-mill town vanished into the distance, hiding away in its wooded valley. Despite everything that I had experienced in Sherrowford, I'd gotten used to the strange atmosphere of the city. I'd lived there for less than a year, but I felt as if I'd lived all my long-stolen decade in a mere 9 months. I had come to know the winding streets with their untended potholes and filthy gutters, the university like a warren of different styles, always with some new cubbyhole or forgotten room to discover, the hidden gems of takeaway restaurants and exotic eateries where rain would take me, the spirit creatures around every corner, vital and ever-present in their dozens, once nightmarish but now an odd kind of nostalgic old friend. Red bricks, solid roofs, rows of terraced houses, weird little shops. In the city center, weirder people, back alleys and back routes and bridges and churches and pubs. Sherrowford didn't need dormitory towns, it had its own trailing edges of ragged suburbs and concrete edifices from the 1960s. Essentially I was a city girl at heart, though reading, where I'd been born and grown up, had not been my city. The years I should have gotten to know reading, I spent in and out of psychiatric care instead, screaming into my pillow or sobbing in the dark, pleading for my sister to come home. But Sherrowford? I was coming to love Sherrowford, perhaps in the way one comes to love an oak tree undermining the foundations of a castle. Old and gnarled, beautiful in its ugliness, abused since the Industrial Revolution and never really allowed to heal. I thought I knew Sherrowford's surroundings, too. We'd been out there and walked the woods together, when Zheng had fled into the countryside. Brinkwood was just more countryside, how bad could it possibly be? We didn't take the train. We had to keep our retreat open, not bound by train timetables. So Rain drove. I hate this place already, Evelyn hissed between her teeth as we entered the village, peering out through the passenger side window. Just look at it. Evie, I sighed, not at her, but at the growing cloud of butterflies in my stomach as I huddled in the back seat, hugging my squid skull mask like a plushie in my lap. It's just a village. There's nothing sinister about it. Please. Call Zheng again, she snapped. Try again. All right, I groaned. Technically Brinky's a town, said Twill. She was sitting in the back with me, with Preem's wide hips squeezed into the middle seat between us, prim and proper, eyes straight ahead. Not a village, really. Brinky? Evelyn spat. Brinky, Preem echoed. Evelyn had held her temper in stormy silence for the entire journey, since we'd wormed our way out of Sherrowford's urban heart and left the arteries of the main roads, to descend into the open countryside north of the city, crisscrossed by single-lane tarmac paths and the unpaved punctuation of farmland access routes. Wide hummocked fields dotted with distant sheep, wild hedgerows overgrown with bramble and nettle, stone walls lined by tall craggy trees, the English rural dream, marred only slightly by the sheer amount of mud either side of the tarmac, the occasional squashed squirrel or hedgehog in the roadway, and the rutted potholes which threatened the integrity of the tires. For me, the local spirit life revealed the lie beneath the surface. The city was almost always packed with numismatic fauna in a constant state of motion and action, perhaps reflecting the lives or vitality of the people. Out here in the countryside it thinned yet intensified, but without the wild sense of freedom I had gotten from the tentacle trees and canopy dwellers in the woods during our previous outing, back when we'd gone to find Zheng. We passed a creature the size of a dinosaur, half lizard half plant, bleeding from 100 wounds as it limped across a distant field. A tall, silent being like a dark pylon stood next to a lonely crossroads, as if waiting for a direction, forever abandoned by its fellows. Down an unpaved side road I spied things like trees but lashed about with pale tentacles, migrating in a herd of a dozen or more, seemingly wandering into the sun-beaten, empty deeps of the countryside. Once, this had all been forests, or at least open common land. Now it was an open-air factory, concealed behind the romance of the rural. How long did spirits live? Did they remember what it was like out here, before enclosure? Were they lost? Spring was in full bloom, carpeting everything with thick, deep green, but the sun couldn't quite chase away the chill in the air. Long shadows fell across the landscape as we plunged into the village of Brinkwood itself. Brinkwood was situated at the mouth of a long, narrow valley, which had once been part of a winding, difficult path through the Pennines, first made obsolete by the iron certainty of the railroads, then later by the ubiquitous brutality of the motorcar. Mill trade and textiles had kept the town alive through the 19th century, but now it was on the dubious life support of small trades, bookies, and local tourism. Tall hills rose either side of the town, humped pale sentinels that had watched the valley since long before human beings had made an outpost of civilization here, always visible over the slate rooftops and rickety chimneys. Their flanks were dotted with trees that thickened lower down. Their angle would make for late sunrises, but thankfully only the trees themselves would deepen the dusk. But the valley which cut between the hills was thick with woods, almost a true forest, a deeper and more tangled offshoot of the lowland woods Zheng had fled to earlier in the year. I watched Evelyn's eyes flickering back and forth over Saturday afternoon pedestrians in the single shopping street, frowning at the sign for an optician's practice, the pizza place optimistically named Galactic Taste, and the pair of gray-faced bank branches dueling over a zebra crossing. We passed one of the village pubs, the King's Elbow, with its picturesque back garden of wooden benches and lunchtime drinkers. But to Evelyn's glare it may as well have been barbed wire fences and minefields. Her scrimshod thigh bone lay in her lap, as if ready to raise it to the window and blast a would-be attacker, as if we were journeying into the dark heart of some occupied territory in our armored vehicle rather than bunch of university girls out in the countryside for a Saturday afternoon drive. At least she couldn't see the spirit life, the monkey things of tar and rock swinging over the rooftops, the silent slug-like sentinels at the crossroads, the bulk of the faceless thing that squatted in the town's churchyard. Stupid name, she hissed. Stupid place. Shouldn't be out here. Oi, twill tutade. It's not that bad. I do go to school here, you know. It's horrible, Evelyn said. No wonder you're so. We couldn't afford the slightest suspicion right then, not with half the stuff we were carrying. I watched the trees gather as we crept through Brinkwood, as the houses thinned away to a trickle, as the thickened, ancient bark was joined by carpets of fallen leaves along the hedgerows. Settle down, girls, Rain said with a smile in her voice. Or I'll turn this car around and take us home. Evelyn grunted. Even as a joke, that is in poor taste, Rain. We leave nobody behind. Twill sighed, not for the first time. It's not a rescue operation, all right? We agreed on that, yeah. We're not gonna leap out of the car and beam my mum over the head, okay? Wouldn't dream of it, Evelyn said through her teeth. Expert consulting, Preem intoned. Preem had her hands folded in her lap, atop her long shell blue skirt. Evelyn had made her change out of her maid uniform before we'd left the house. Just in case. Yeah. Twill said, nodding and pointing at Preem in the middle seat. Yeah, listen to Preem, she's got it right. We're not going in guns blazing. It's not like Nikki's been kidnapped. I had it all wrong earlier, right? You have been listening to me, yeah? Every bloody word, Evelyn hissed. Hey, Twill. Rain said, turning her head toward Twill without taking her eyes off the road. She was slowing the car at a junction, a village crossroads where the houses truly and finally ran out, replaced by heavy old oaks and beeches climbing the slopes. Right turn here, yeah. Your place is just beyond. Yeah, halfway down toward the bridge, Twill said. Along here, left at the fork, then it's third on the right. First two are just fields, so you can't miss it. The house is pretty obvious. Rain took the turning, car wheels soft on the pitted and water-eaten asphalt. Evelyn started chewing on her thumbnail. Perhaps she was hungry. We hadn't even had time to eat lunch before we'd left, nothing except cramming a few cereal bars into our faces. I pulled my eyes away from the passing trees, the woods punctuated by distant fields that climbed the valley's sides, and the deeper patches where the trees ran back beneath miles of deep canopy. Evie, I said, and found my throat a little scratchy. My nerves were getting to me, despite the squid skull in my lap and my one manifested tentacle wrapped around my shoulders in a self-hug. I'd tucked the other 5 away for now, folded them back into imagination and phantasm, as a concession to squeezing 3 people into the back seat. Evie, it reminds you of Sussex, doesn't it? Evelyn twisted to frown at me over her shoulder, over the back of the passenger seat. For foo, she started, then cut off with a sharp sigh at the look in my eyes. Maybe. I don't know. It's nothing like where you grew up, I said, reaching forward to pat her awkwardly on the shoulder. Yeah, Twill added with a forced laugh. You lived in a big posh house. This ain't that. Evelyn huffed and turned back to staring out of the windscreen, as if we might suddenly come under attack as we plunged beneath the tall canopy of ancient woodland. Keep your eyes open, Heather, she grumbled. Especially for anything that doesn't look like natural pneumosomatic fauna. I know, I sighed. There's nothing out of the ordinary. So far. All eyes on the road, Preem announced. The way is clear. Yes, you as well, thank you Preem. Evelyn sighed, wrapping her fingernails on the passenger seat armrest. And Heather, try calling Jing again, before we get there. She bloody well better be in position. I don't want to be sitting in this car waiting for her to turn up. In position? Twill asked. In position for what? We're not going to storm my own house. Rain laughed and shook her head. Never thought I'd see you trusting Jing to keep us safe, Evie. What, I'm not enough. Just in case, Evelyn grunted. Heather, call her. I'm already doing it, I said, clearing my throat, holding my phone to my ear. Please, Evelyn added, then, sorry. Sorry, I don't like this. None of us do, Rain said with a grin. Speak for yourselves, said Twill. It's only Brinkwood. It's home. My phone rang quietly in my hand. The trees crawled by alongside the narrowing road. I willed Jing to pick up. Evelyn wasn't wrong, we needed as much protection as we could get, even if this was all above board and absolutely not a trap, by either the Brinkwood cult which I seriously doubted or a distant and unknowable move by Edward Lilburn which I doubted significantly less. To our collective credit, we hadn't instantly descended into a tailspin of paranoia and panic after Twill's mysterious phone call from her mother. Quite a feat, seeing as it had come hot on the heels of both planned and improvised duels outside, one of the most magically and emotionally complex things any of us had done in a while. Rain and Zheng had both been covered in blood, I'd been all a whirl inside my own head with emotional overload and quasi-sexual awe, and we'd had a stable gateway to Camelot to deal with, whatever we decided to do about Nicole's situation. After a bit more second-hand confused back and forth between Twill and her mother on the other end of the phone, we'd established a few basic facts. Nicole Webb was at Twill's house, not being held hostage, and free to leave whenever she wanted. But she was neither willing nor able to leave under her own power. According to Twill's mother, Nicole Webb, Private Eye, had stumbled out of the woods in a semi-coherent daze, a fugue state, talking nonsense, actual nonsense, even by the standards of people in the know, who worshipped an outsider and had a werewolf for a daughter. So, no exaggeration there. She'd collapsed on their doorstep and they'd taken her indoors. For anybody else, they would have called an ambulance and maybe the police. After all, this wasn't any of their business. Except that Twill's mother recognized Nicole, from the meeting between us and Edward's people. Nicole was in the know, exposed to the supernatural, and as far as Twill's mother knew, still very much a police detective. I think she just wants this off the family's hands, you know. Twill explained to us after she'd hung up. This isn't anything to do with them. This is the shit we've had Super Spy Nikki doing, right? Looking for Edward's place. Maybe, Evelyn hissed. But maybe not. I don't know. We don't know anything. We go in as if it is a trap, Evelyn said. No complaints, no arguing. Or you stay here and we'll do it without you. It's my home. It's my parents. I don't think it's going to be a trap, I had piped up, my mouth gone dry, my hands shaking. I couldn't stop thinking about what Nicole had said, about the documents she'd stolen from Edward, the sense she'd gotten that the information itself had been avoiding her curiosity, trying to hide from her insight. Had she lied to us? Had she carried on with the investigation regardless? Nah, Rain had said to that. For my money, Nikki's way too sensible to stick her nose back in, not when she said she'd stop. We are going to retrieve her regardless, Evelyn said. Nobody gets left behind. Left behind where? Twill shouted. She's at my bloody house, it's not like she's behind enemy lines or some shit. Jan had cleared her throat, still flanked by the towering presence of July. Excuse me, she'd interjected as we'd all started melting down at each other, flapping one hand of her overstuffed coat to get our attention. I do hope I'm not included in this weak statement of yours. I don't know what you lot are up to, exactly, but I would rather not be involved in anything that includes a police detective, ex or otherwise. Evelyn sighed and rolled her eyes. Yes. Obviously. And this is none of your business anyway. She can hang out with me. Lozzie chirped, bumping into Jan's side like an amorous cat rubbing itself on a nearby leg. Oh. Jan sort of caught her but without touching her, suddenly all delicate hover hands and blushing cheeks. Well, that's very kind of you, but we, Actually, Evelyn snapped, I've changed my mind. You can help. July had perked up at that. Jan had looked up too, head surfacing from her coat like a seal from an ice hole. Absolutely no. You can house sit. So Evelyn had taken charge of planning. She'd shoot us out of the room while she and Lozzie deactivated the gateway. Zheng and Rain had done their best to clean the blood off their respective faces and in Zheng's case, her belly and hips, swapping out her t-shirt for something clean. I'd flittered around, still shell-shocked after the duels, more than a little sweaty, badly in need of a sit-down, but found myself making a cup of tea for Jan and July. But that wasn't to last. Evelyn reappeared like a whirlwind of command. Zheng was dispatched with Evelyn's instructions but by my request to reach Twill's house before the rest of us did, with her mobile phone firmly in her pocket and strict instructions not to pull any doors off any hinges or any heads off any necks. Zheng had strode past Twill in the kitchen as if ignoring her but then briefly grabbed her head in one massive hand, let out a chuckle, and vanished out the back door before Twill could retaliate with a bite. And you're certain, Evelyn had pressed Lozzie, there's no way you can just jump there, yes? There's no singing calling me there, Lozzie had said, sighing at the kitchen table. I can go out. But not back anywhere I choose, not unless I can hear. And I don't know the voices out there or the reflections. So no. Okay. Evelyn huffed, but she nodded. I suppose so. I'd caught Sevens briefly, in the front room, during the only moment we'd had alone before we'd left the house. Please do keep an eye on things, I'd murmured as the others got ready. You're one of us, you're part of the house. I think I trust Jan and July, but this is all so sudden, I need somebody here who I can trust for sure, who is powerful enough to just in case. I wanna come too, Sevens had rasped, clinging to my front with her hands curled into claws. I wanna watch you. Nothing is going to happen, I said to her. I hope. We'll see what's up with Nikki, and. You're kidding yourself, Sevens bumped her head against my shoulder, gurgling the words into my flesh, chewing gently on my hoodie. I hugged her awkwardly. Watching the house is important too, I said. Okay. But I'll be there if you need it. Don't jeopardize your progress, Sevens. For you. Rain, Evelyn, Twill, Preem, and I had all piled into Rain's reliable but somewhat cramped car. We left Jan and July with Lozzie, Tenny and Sevens, and with Whistle trotting around in the kitchen, what we hoped were capable hands. Deerswin Farm Twill's family home was tucked away just past Brinkwood itself, an open secret not quite fully subsumed by the creeping mud and green rot of the deep woods, but not truly part of the village either. It stood on the borderland between one world and the next, though I had the distinct impression that not all of us could feel the lingering transition as we passed between the jumbled mass of thickening trees. The road narrowed, the mud encroached on crumbling asphalt, and the canopy above blocked out most of the sunlight. You actually walk this, every day, to get to school or the train station? Evelyn asked, her voice dropping to a subconscious whisper as if something might hear us from beyond the ever-closer tree line. Twill shrugged. Yeah. It's not that bad, it's not like a dirt path or something. It's only like 15 minutes walk to school. 15 minutes, Evelyn laughed without humor, shaking her head. We're hardly in the Outer Hebrides. You don't have to get on a boat to get here. We've driven here from Sherrowford. In like 20 minutes. I still had my phone pressed to my ear, still ringing, still going unanswered. Zheng wasn't picking up. It is absolutely the back of beyond, Evelyn hissed. Her attention suddenly snapped up from the road as the trees parted ahead of us, as the house and grounds loomed out of the woods, a sudden fairy ring among the boughs. Is that it? She asked. Rain was laughing. Didn't know you lived in a mansion, Twill. It's not a mansion. Twill was getting shrill, which wasn't helping my nerves. It's not even as big as your house. Oh my goodness, I said, putting my free hand over my mouth at the sight of the place. Rain must have caught the panic in my voice. Heather. It's busy, Preem intoned, bell clear, cutting through our confusion. To call Twill's family home a farm was not really accurate. That was a sentimental anachronism, no matter what status claimed by the little rusted sign at the end of the driveway. At some distant point in the past, an optimistic pioneer had carved out a few fields here in the shadows of the tall trees, cleared the woods back to a higher ridge in the earth, erected a row of stables, added a set of fences, and then crowned their achievement with a rambling farmhouse in red brick, dark slate, and thick wooden beams. Nature had since digested all those ambitions. The fields were overgrown with long grass, thistles, and hardy little saplings, slowly recolonizing the clearing and returning it to the forest. The fences were rotten and full of holes. Only one field still boasted intact fences, painstakingly repaired with modern lumber and treated with creosote paint, but still pockmarked with green mosses and damp lichens. I spotted a pair of alpacas far off in the corner of that field, with a small group of sheep clustered around them as they looked up at our approach. The block of stables had collapsed long ago. Only one at the far end was kept in any state of repair, wrapped in tarpaulin as a form of weatherproofing. The stub of a black-beamed barn poked from the scrub ground beyond, looking like it had once burnt almost to the ground. At least the driveway was fresh gravel, no older than a few years since it was last replaced, not too riven with mud holes and wheel ruts. The farmhouse itself was the only part of the property that obviously received regular attention and maintenance. A low structure of only 2 floors, it was nothing like the grandiose size of the manor house down in Sussex on the Say estate. Twill was correct about that. It was neither fancy nor posh, but it was still much larger and more dignified than any modern new build one might find in Sherrowford. In form it was less neat and regular than number 12, Barnslow Drive. The building looked like it had started life as a much smaller structure, then been progressively added to on one side, lending it an outline like a series of smaller boxes being pulled out of each other. But it was far better tended than our home. No ivy climbed the clean red brickwork, no tiles were missing from the slate roof, the small square windows were clean and a little back patio was festooned with healthy green potted plants. I could tell that whoever was responsible for the building loved it dearly. And so did I, love at first sight and more than a little bit of envy directed at Twill, for getting to grow up in a place like this. It was real and cared for in a way I so rarely saw. On closer inspection some of the roof tiles were the wrong color, sourced from anywhere to fill the gaps. The window panes were clean but the crossbeams had not been repainted in years. What I had thought was metal trim on the patio doors was actually masses of duct tape, holding the hinges on. Whoever cared for this place did not have deep resources to draw on, but they were mounting a desperate rearguard action against time and decay. Whoever would willingly care for an old and venerable building in such a way was my instant friend and ally. But that wasn't what I was reacting to. I only processed that later. "What do you mean, busy?" Evelyn hissed. "Preem, what do you mean?" "Busy," Preem repeated. "But the way is clear." "Heather." Rain slowed as we approached the gravel driveway. "What do you see?" "Should we stop?" "It's just my home," Twill huffed. "The way is clear," Preem repeated. Ah. If Preem thinks I struggled to find my voice, but I didn't have time to do more than that. The car rounded the farm's hedgerow border, giving us a view down the driveway, all the way to the front door of the farmhouse. I lowered my phone from my ear and killed the unanswered call. No wonder Zheng hadn't picked up. The wide space between the front of the house and the abandoned stables was paved with a broad patch of cracked and crumbly tarmac, laid down as room for parking, an ugly practicality amid this grand ruin. It was currently occupied by a beefy green Land Rover that I recognized from our first meeting with the Church of Hringwindla, alongside a pair of more sensible-looking cars, one of which was parked at a jaunty angle which screamed I was in a hurry when I pulled up. Twill's mother, Christine Hopton, was standing on the raised brick step before the front door, almost exactly as I recalled her from our previous meetings, like Twill but 30 years older, with long unbound gray hair and a face lined by a lifetime of genuine smiles. But right then she was frowning, her arms folded beneath a tie-dye shawl, her body language like a schoolteacher threatened with a knife. Benjamin Twill's cousin, who'd we'd also met before, months ago, was standing next to her on the tarmac. For all his heavily muscled bulk and close-cropped hair and imposing looks, he was currently white-faced and open-mouthed in naked terror. Opposite them, 12 feet away, wrapped in her long coat and fresh, unbloodied clothes, stood Zheng. She was baring her teeth, moving her head back and forth with all the predatory intent of a big cat sizing up a rival. "Oh shit!" Twill shouted, fumbling with the door handle. "Shit shit shit!" "No, Twill," I said, trying to grab for her over Preem's lap and managing only to get a face full of Preem's chest. "It's fine, she's not glaring at your mum." "Heather!" Evelyn snapped, fumbling inside her coat. "Preem! What are we looking at? One of you bloody well explain." "Zheng's in a staring contest," I said, panic clawing up my throat. Preem helped me sit back up. I think, anyway. I think it's okay." "Staring contest with what?" Twill yelled, popping the car door even though the wheels were still rolling. The smell of the woods rushed inside the car, loamy soil and rotting leaves. The bubble things, I said. The cults, I mean, your family's servitors. Doggies, Preem intoned. I had failed to remind myself that the people who owned this house had the strings of an outsider god wrapped around their brains, but the bubble servitors were impossible to ignore. They were crawling all over the exterior of the house. A dozen or more. I'd witnessed a single example of the Brinkwood cult's angels once before, back when Twill's mother, Christine Hopton, high priestess of the Church of Hringewindla, had visited us in order to offer the resources and help of the church with cracking the Sherrowford cult's interdimensional gateways. Though that had turned out to maybe, possibly, be a trap. That seemed like so long ago now, before we'd stormed the castle, before Alexander's demise, before I'd rediscovered what I really was. And before Zheng. The bubble servitors were only semi-visible, glinting in the sunlight like blobs of oversized soap suds, individual bubbles sliding over each other in a constant process of liquid rearrangement. Back in Sherrowford, I'd found it hard to gauge the size of the one that Christine Hopton had brought with her, but outlined now against the roof of the house, the background of thick woods, and the tarmac and grass of the grounds, the cult's real muscle was much clearer. Each one was about 6 or 7 feet in diameter, though they took a constantly shifting, irregular shape, making it hard to standardize. 4 or 5 of the things were perched on the roof, and it was difficult to tell them apart as they circled and bobbed. Another 2 floated through the little garden like silent airbound jellyfish. One hovered over the front door, within inches of Christine and Benjamin's heads. Several clustered around the dilapidated stables, and more of them were hanging over the distant, overgrown fields. We passed one on guard duty by the driveway, component bubbles slipping and sliding as if it was somehow reacting to the car's movement. The motion of the things made my stomach turn over. It made me think of naked muscle with the skin stripped away. I couldn't help but notice there was no other spirit life here. This was a monoculture. Hringewindla's angel buds only. And one of the bubble servitors was right in front of Zheng, hanging in the air, as if locked in a staring contest. Unfortunately, nobody but Preem and I could see that. Even when Evelyn pulled out her modified 3D glasses, I don't think she understood what she was looking at. Everybody else saw Zheng making a face like she wanted to eat Twill's mum, and not in the fun way. Twill boggled at me, then leapt from the car as Rain was still pulling to a stop. She hit the tarmac running and sprinted over to put herself between Zheng and her mother. "Oh yes, make everything worse, well done," Evelyn shouted, whipping the glasses off her face. "Somebody help me up before this all explodes." Then Rain was setting the handbrake and killing the engine, and the rest of us piled out of the car too, out into the loamy scent and rustling leaves of the middle of the woods, straight into a whirlwind. Twill. Language. Scolded by her own mother. Hey, what the hell is that? Benjamin was freaking out. What the hell is she? I am not dealing with that, I am not dealing with that. Everybody. Calm. Down. Evelyn couldn't snap loud enough, voice lost in the creaking of the trees overhead. Preem and I got her to her feet before I realized how badly she was shaking, how much she didn't want to be here, how risky she felt this was. Woof. Good dog. Preem, talking to something almost nobody else could see. Arr. Zheng kept growling, louder and louder. Whoa, hey, no need for violence, okay? Rain, always brave, stepping forward with her hands out. We're all here to. Mom, get indoors and. I will absolutely not, this is a misunderstanding. A swish and a click and a low tone from Rain, her stubby black pistol suddenly in her hand. Wouldn't do that if I were you, mate. Then tell your cousin to. You get her to back off then. Benjamin pointed at Zheng. His hand was shaking. Zheng rumbled between her teeth, twisting her head left and right at the revolting mass of bubbles in front of her eyes. Little subclusters of iridescent spheres followed her motion, as if mimicking or mocking. The colors on the bubble servitor's surface ran together, oil on water, forcing me to blink hard to clear my itching, stinging eyes. Evelyn's grip tightened on my arm as the situation spiraled out of control. I tried to speak. She's not. But Twill yelled over me. This isn't what we. Twill, dear. Evelyn raised her voice again. Everybody shut the foo. I'm getting the gun. Don't you move a muscle, fella, you stay right there. Rain, put it down. Hissrk. I hissed long and loud and hard, so hard that my throat ached and burned when I finally let the sound trail off, but the stunt did the trick. Everybody stopped shouting and waving their arms about. I only realized after I'd done it that I'd also reached out and wrapped my single manifested tentacle around Rain's wrists, forcing her pistol to stay pointed at the ground. We all stood there for a moment in stunned silence, broken only by the rustle of leaves overhead as I panted and swallowed and forced my throat back into the proper human configuration. In the distant field, the little clutch of sheep with their pair of alpaca guardians were all staring at me, and my predator sound. Evelyn was shaking gently against my arm. Twill was staring at me, thankful but shocked. Benjamin looked like he'd soiled himself. Jing didn't care, still locked in silent confrontation with the bubble bath creature. Christine Hopton cleared her throat. Thank you, she managed to say, a little shocked but quickly recovering her poise and dignity. Heather, if I am recalling correctly. Thank you. I grunted, my throat now too raw for words, filled with the scent of mud and bark. Thank you, indeed. Now, if everybody could stay calm, please. Ben, don't go anywhere, do not introduce more firearms to this situation. And Twill, she added quickly, if you could not start shouting. Rain pointed her gun at us, Twill huffed. She didn't, actually, Christine said. She was always pointing it at the ground. Safety first, Rain said with a polite nod. And the safety's on, too. Her eyes flicked to Benjamin, who was standing there like a pillar of salt, staring at me in shock, his hands half raised like he wasn't sure if he should surrender or not. Just don't go fetching any shotguns, okay? Sure, he said. Whatever. All right. He nodded at Zheng. You've got a bloody revenant standing right there, though. Can somebody call it off, please? Zheng does what she pleases, Evelyn said. She caught my eye and nodded too, mouthing a silent thank you. Shaman, Zheng finally rumbled, without taking her eyes off the bubble servitor inches from her nose. Benjamin jumped. Christine blinked in surprise. I think they'd assumed Zheng couldn't talk. The god spawn blocks the way. I am not to pass. Wait, what? Twill said, frowning in confusion. Ah. Christine winced with implicit apology. The angels. I thought that was happening, I do apologize. Neither I nor Ben here can see them. She waved an impatient hand at Benjamin. Go tell Amanda they need calming. Our guests need to come inside and see to their friend. And do not return with the shotgun. What? Ben pulled a grimace. Leave you out here with them? Oi, I'm standing right here. Twill said. Ben, Christine said, firmer than expected. Inside. Tell Amanda. Now. He sighed and shrugged, shaking his meaty head. Fine. He pointed at Twill. You look after your mum. Twill, her mother scolded. I tried not to watch that exchange, mortified for Twill, for her family, for everyone involved. I felt like we'd walked in on something we shouldn't be witnessing. Evelyn cleared her throat loudly, shoulders hunched against the wind through the trees. Her grip on my arm was particularly tight and I didn't blame her, not with the way the tall trunks creaked and swayed far above us. Where is Nicole Webb? She asked. Christine bowed her head as if embarrassed. Indoors, in our sitting room. She's safe, We haven't done anything. Ben, please, if you could get moving. Wait, Evelyn snapped. Before we all go exploding off in our separate directions, I would like to establish exactly what is going on here. Nobody move, please. From anybody else, in any other tone but long-suffering exasperation, the words, "nobody move, please," would probably have sent several of the people present in that tumble-down forest clearing all moving at once, at high speed, with dangerous intent. But Evelyn was so fed up she managed to make it into a phrase of de-escalation, even as she rummaged inside her coat. Her hand emerged with the magically modified 3D glasses once again, their rims covered in tiny magical symbols. She slipped them on and looked around with a frown, first curious, then increasingly disgusted. "Ugh," she muttered. "Worse than I imagined. Why are there so many of them? Preem, step away from that one, please. Don't touch it." Preem withdrew her hovering hand. She'd been reaching out to one of the bubble servitors at the edge of the tarmac, as if the invisible numismatic godbud was just an unfamiliar dog. "They are quite safe," Christine said. "And I do apologize." "Says you," Evelyn hissed. I half expected Twill to bristle with offense, but she just grimaced and looked away, out at the dank woods beyond. Christine sighed and briefly closed her eyes. Benjamin looked like he wanted to punch something. "I count 14 of them," Evelyn said, then gestured with the head of her walking stick at the one Zheng was facing off against. "One right there. Heather, Preem. Is this correct? Anything I'm missing?" "No, no." I shook my head. "Actually, there's no other spirits around at all. Nothing, anywhere." "Ominous," Rain said with a smirk. "Because of us?" I asked, my chest tightening with strange guilt. Christine blinked at me. I was too far away to glimpse the depths of her eyes, but for a moment I remembered what I'd seen there when she'd visited us in Sherrowford, her god moving through her like a behemoth in the deep. "Why, no, dear," she said. "Because we don't know what your friend was running from. And we're not a threat." Evelyn asked, though it only sounded half like a question. I could almost hear the gears turning inside Evelyn's mind. Christine shook her head. She sighed heavily, hesitated, and then stepped off the little raised brick platform before the solid front door of the house, down onto the tarmac. She strode forward, short and compact, but confident, with her chin held high, eyes compassionate yet guarded, arms folded but not afraid. Benjamin reached out awkwardly to stop her, but Twill batted his hand out of the way, snarling at him. Christine walked halfway toward Zheng and Evelyn and myself, until she was only a few feet away. "You are my daughter's friends and companions," she said. "I like to think we can have cordial relations, even strained like this. Even if only personally, if not between our church and your, well, coven." "Family," I said before anybody could stop me. Christine blinked in surprise, then nodded politely. "Coven is good enough," Evelyn grunted. "Yo, hey," Twill spoke up. "Protection's a good idea right now though. Mom, you keep these bubble thingies around, right? Tell Amanda to keep em here. We still don't know if this is Ed." "Twill," Evelyn said, loud and clear, cutting her off. "What?" Twill looked outraged. "What? I'm not supposed to tell my family. This is my home, Evie." Evelyn stared back at Twill, frowning hard and conflicted, sucking on her teeth. "It would assist us," Christine said, "if we were to know what is going on." "Please, Miss Say." "Evie," I ventured. "May I?" Evelyn frowned at Twill, then at Christine, then around at the bubble servitors again. She slowly pulled the 3D glasses off her face, then sighed and nodded. "Thank you," I whispered, then raised my voice. "I'm sorry we're all so on edge, we've come straight from a mess." Rain snorted, but I carried on. Nicole Webb, the lady you have in there, she's a private eye. She was working on a job for us, trying to locate a property that belongs to Edward Lilburn." "Ah," said Christine. We told her to stop, Evelyn said. There were unexplained irregularities in the location she was attempting to find. That was yesterday. So either she didn't stop, or something else happened to her. Edward Lilburn, Christine echoed. Indeed. We would rather not have any further dealings with him at all, Christine said. Zheng rumbled like a volcano caged in stone. She finally turned her dark and brooding eyes away from the bubble servitor silently blocking her way, and stared down at Christine instead. The bubble servitor moved like oil on glass through the air, sliding to cover the gap between them. Sound judgment, appendage, Zheng said. Hey! Twill snapped, running up to join her mother. Twill's mother managed to look back at Zheng for all of about 3 seconds, then averted her eyes. I see you've expanded your coven, since we last spoke. Zheng, I said, pitching my voice as firmly as I could though it came out in a squeak. Zheng, please do not hurt these people. They're not our enemies. Zheng sighed a great sigh and turned her gaze back to the bubble servitor itself. This thing, this gauze, this membrane of light, I could tear it in two with my little finger. Please don't, I repeated. Ha, she snorted. Christine took a deep breath and gestured at Benjamin again. Amanda, now. Tell her to suit them. Benjamin put his hands up, sighed like we were all making a terrible mistake, and slipped back inside though the open front door, devoured by the heavy shadows just beyond the threshold. A moment of awkward silence passed as we stood around on that patch of rotten tarmac. The trees creaked all around us, ships in a storm. I had the distinct impression that we stood in a brief pause of light and space literally, as sunlight poured down into this temporary woodland clearing whilst all around us a deep darkness lurked beyond the tree line. Superstitious illusion, the paranoia of a lifelong city girl. I'd been out to the woods before, it was only plants and animals. Even the spirits were nice. Twill let out a big sigh, suddenly very ordinary teenager again. Rain shrugged and put her pistol away. Preem stopped staring at the nearest bubble servitor and took up her place next to Evelyn again. Where's Dad at? Twill asked. Christine was trying to smile at Evelyn and myself. Work, dear. He's at work. Who else is about? Is it just you and Ben or? Twill trailed off, catching the knowing look that passed directly between her mother and Evelyn. Mage and High Priestess understood why no answer was forthcoming, though it took the rest of us a moment to catch up. Rain laughed first. I sighed. Twill went, come on. Truce, Preem intoned. We already have a truce, Evelyn said, low and serious, speaking to Christine. You don't have to tell us how many people you have inside. You're already quite well defended. No offense meant or taken. We're also not here to attack anybody, I spoke up, trying to sound strict. Yeah, damn right, Twill said. Christine looked away, wet her lips, then sighed awkwardly. William and Jowdy are upstairs, she said. Twill cringed. With instructions to stay there until this is all over. She looked back to Evelyn again, chin high and defiant. They're Twill's little cousins, they were here to visit their mother. This is a Saturday, after all. Children? Evelyn asked. Christine nodded. If there's no violence from you, there won't be any from us. I promise that. Zheng rumbled at the bubble servitor. Wizard, you make no promises for my. Preem reached out one delicate hand and poked Zheng in the side, beneath her ribs with one outstretched finger. No. Christine stayed frozen for a second, watching Zheng carefully. But my beautiful demon host only glowered in silence. Aunt Amanda's here too, right? Twill prompted. Yes, Christine found her voice again. Yes. Quite. She's looking at the policewoman right now. Private Eye, I'm sorry. I believe the rest of you met Amanda during the meeting at that pub in Sherrowford. She is our foremost practitioner of the divine arts, but she can't find anything wrong with Miss Webb. Vaguely remember her, Evelyn said. I agreed. I barely recalled her at all, to be honest. A dumpy woman, run to fat from stress, with bags beneath her eyes and that haunted look which came from too much intimacy with the supernatural. Christine glanced at Twill. Gareth is here with her. Ah, what? Twill pulled a face. He can't tell his arse from his elbow. He's looking at Nikki too. Actually, I think he's just admiring Amanda, Christine said in a stage whisper. Twill snorted. Miss Say, Evelyn, Heather, Preem, was it? Preem, yes. Rain too. And Zheng, I supplied. Zheng, Christine finished, trying very hard to look directly at the 7 feet of rippling muscle standing in her front driveway. Pleased to meet you, yes. If you'd all like to come inside and take a look at your friend, would much appreciate it, because we don't know what's wrong with her. Actually, Evelyn said. I'd prefer if you bring her out here. Yeah, Rain agreed slowly. We'll take her off your hands, okay? Christine sighed sharply. I'm afraid that might be quite difficult. She can barely stand, let alone walk in a straight line. Between us we won't be able to manhandle her out here. Though Twill, dear. Yeah, I could sling her over my shoulder, Twill said, then sighed too, at Evelyn. This isn't a trap, hey. What proof do you need? Evelyn met her gaze with a clenched jaw. I don't believe it is, but she looked upward, at the house, then lifted the modified 3D glasses to her eyes again. There are no guardian angels inside my house, Christine said. This is not a trap. Your friend walked out of the woods and she can barely stand. She's also not speaking coherent sentences. What exactly does that mean? Evelyn asked. What's she been saying? Christine shrugged. Neither myself nor Amanda has ever seen anything like it before, and, well, we've both seen rather a lot. She is speaking, but it's just nonsense. She didn't run into your god out in the woods, did she? Rain asked, polite but serious. Christine shook her head. I doubt that very much. How can you be sure? Christine shot Rain a pinched look, irritated but trying to stay polite. I have seen my own husband embraced by the thoughts of our divine patron. I know what such a state looks like. This is not it. Evelyn grunted. We don't seriously think you've done this to her, but we need to rule it out. Twill. Twill blinked at Evelyn, then caught on, nodding along. Yeah, right. You can trust my mum on this. She didn't visit your church. Evelyn did her best to suppress a sigh before that last word. Christine opened her mouth to answer, then glanced suddenly and sharply at me. I blinked back at her, feeling naked, like she was looking right through me. Evelyn cleared her throat. I do know where it's located, she said. I have my grandmother's maps. If we wanted to attack you, it would be simple. I'm not going to go there, I said to Christine, but I knew I was talking to the thing watching me through her eyes, the thing that had been mortally terrified of a visit from me, back when the church had tried to draw us in previously. You've nothing to fear from me. I'm sorry. Behind her, Twill pulled a face that threatened to break my heart, biting her lower lip and averting her eyes. She hated being reminded of this. Of course, dear, Christine suddenly sighed, smiling again. Nothing to apologize for. And no, Miss Webb certainly did not visit our church. She wandered out of the woods right over there. Christine finally uncrossed her arms and pointed out of the driveway, across the road, to where the sucking mud and mulched leaves formed a shallow ditch on the far side. Which means she probably came off the main road somehow, perhaps the A523 or a smaller road. We have no idea where her car is, though she does have her keys on her. Tracks, Jing rumbled, still facing down the bubble servitor, which was shifting and adjusting in front of her. Oh, yes. Christine confirmed, a little too hard when pressed by Zheng's rumble. We didn't touch her footprints. The mud is very pliable this time of year. If you want to check, they're right there, leading back into the woods. You may check for yourselves if you don't believe me. Evelyn sucked on her teeth. I don't think that'll be necessary. Rain raised an eyebrow at her. Evie. Evelyn nodded slowly. I believe you and I need to. Suddenly and without warning, the bubble servitor that had been blocking Zheng retreated from us, rolling over itself like a modular slug. Zheng growled, a goated tiger. I flinched, disgusted by the motion and wincing at the effect on my eyes. Preem raised a hand and waved politely. The other servitors on the roof and dotted about the old farm also adjusted their positions, as if adopting some modified guard pattern now we'd been confirmed as not a threat. Christine waited a beat, holding her breath. Have the angels relaxed? Stood down, Preem intoned. Christine let out a sigh of relief. Good. Good. I was half worried Ben was going to come back out swinging, he can be so difficult sometimes. You may all come inside now, if you want. You don't all have to, I understand if you'd rather not. I do hope you can figure out what's wrong with your friend. Evelyn and I shared a glance. Rain shrugged. Twill rolled her eyes, the very picture of a sulky teenager. We'll all come in, I think, Evelyn said, nodding slowly. Through my arm and my one tentacle, I could feel the beating of her heart. Her pulse in her wrist, going a little too fast. I think you and we need to trust each other. Well, good. Twill said. Indeed. Christine nodded. I agree, if only for. And I'm not just talking to you, Christine, Evelyn interrupted. I'm talking to the thing in your head. We need not be on opposite sides. Mr. Edward Lilburn could be a problem for both of us, especially because we can't find the bastard, and he has a track record for exploiting things like you and. A scream suddenly cut across our little peace conference, muffled from inside the walls of the house, loud enough to make us all jump and send the sheep and alpacas in the distant field scrambling for the fence. A woman's scream, high-pitched with fright, but it was not the voice of Private Detective Nicole Webb. A scream, deep in the woods beneath the leaf-dappled sunlight, from inside the rambling old farmhouse, muffled by red brick and dark slate and heavy beams. No neighbors within earshot, no busy road of passing cars, no good Samaritan on the path. Only trees and weeds and a handful of sheep to hear the chilling cry. And us, of course. Oh, you're joking, I hissed before the scream could finish. This was too obvious, too kitsch, too much like one of those cheesy black and white horror movies that Rain sometimes got me to watch with her. Those were only enjoyable because I got to snuggle up in her lap, though I did appreciate the sheer enthusiasm she showed for the rather obvious progression of overwrought spooky nonsense. And now here we were, deep in the closest thing to a real forest in the north of England, potentially less than a mile or two from a real outsider buried beneath an ancient church, off balance and tired after supernatural sports day, facing down a tense but not dangerous situation with some very suspicious angels, which looked more like frothed bleach than ladies with wings, when what should interrupt our relaxation of terms but a blood-curdling scream? Was a giant bat about to burst from the chimney and go flapping off into the woods? Would bony hands erupt from the soil, clutching for brains? Were we about to hear the clank of chains and the moaning of a ghost? Perhaps Edward Lilburn was a fan of Hammer horror classics too. The scream cut off as suddenly as it had started, but thankfully not with a gurgle of ruptured windpipe or bloody vomit. A beat of stunned silence descended on the woodland clearing, the old farmhouse, and our patch of crumbly tarmac, broken only by the rustle of leaves, the creak of trees, and some distantly confused bleating from the handful of sheep. You can bloody well say that again, Heather, Evelyn whispered between her teeth, still holding tight to my arm, her forearm linked through mine. She must have heard my exasperated hiss. Then we lost control. Amanda! Christine shouted. She started hurrying back toward the open front door of the house, which seemed to yawn on an infinite black depth, an illusion caused by the bright day outdoors. Amanda. That's my aunt, shit. Twill said. Twill picked up her feet like a sprinter and raced past her mother before anybody could stop her. She took the front steps in one leap, already half werewolf by the time her feet touched the bricks. Wisps of ghostly canine form whirled about her arms and upper back. Wait. Evelyn snapped. Twill, you wait. But Twill was already slipping inside the house, vanishing out of sight in the cool darkness. Her mother trotted up the steps and followed her indoors. In for a penny, in for a pound, hey. Rain said, wheeling backward to face us as she moved to catch up with Twill. She nodded to Zheng as well. Come on, Lefty, tanks up front. Preem, you watch the rear, yeah. This is obviously a trap. Evelyn snapped. Well, it's a stupid one, then, I huffed, covering anxiety with exasperation. More than a bit premature, I think. The shaman is right, Zheng rumbled, baring her teeth in a distasteful grimace. She didn't like the look of this either. Our help is not needed. Good doggies, Preem intoned. What? Evelyn squinted at us all, bewildered. Heather? Rain asked. They're going inside, I said, as if it was obvious. Not much of a trap if you get I don't know, dissolved. I pointed at the house before I remembered that neither Evelyn nor Rain could see what was plain to myself, Zheng, and Preem. Evelyn fumbled the modified 3D glasses back onto her face as I huffed with embarrassment. She cringed and went pale before passing the glasses to Rain. We really need more than one pair of those, Evelyn muttered. Seek, said Rain. Most of the bubble servitors were rapidly oozing their way inside the farmhouse, passing directly through the glass of closed windows, each one like a wet sponge squeezing itself through the neck of a bottle. They made no sound, but the motion of bubbles sliding over each other and compressing as they squished themselves indoors filled my imagination with the noise of raw meat sliding through mud. It reminded me of a video I'd seen of a whale fall, the miniature ecosystem of scavengers which formed on the sea floor around the carcass of a dead whale, the soft-bodied cephalopods and pale mollusks of the ocean trenches worming their way through decaying flesh. A few bubble servitors stayed on the roof as lookouts, but all the rest slucked and slippered and slid indoors. We stood watching as they vanished behind the walls of the house. Amanda Hopton, Twill's aunt, the woman who'd apparently just screamed her head off, had once been described to us as the one member of the Church of Hringwindla who had spent the most time learning from their god. And now all Hringwindla's angels were rushing to her defense. If this was indeed a trap, then her attacker was in for a very nasty surprise. Zheng is right, we're probably surplus to requirements here, Evelyn said with a sigh. But she put her walking stick forward and tried to straighten her shoulders, pulling her chin up and setting her jaw. She almost managed to cover for the pale, blood-drained look in her face. I squeezed her arm, proud of her efforts, but not wanting her to push herself. But we should show we're willing to help, regardless. And Twill did just run in there, bloody fool. I don't hear any shouting or crashing about, Rain said. She turned back to the house with a smirk. Guess we're in the clear. Eyes up, little wolf, Zheng purred. We know nothing. Probably just saw a spider under the sink. Spiders are lovely, Preem intoned. Nothing leapt out at us as we approached the house, neither from the distant tree line nor the lingering shadows beyond the front door. No red eyes peered from the upper windows, even when I watched for slightly longer than necessary. No maddened screams echoed from inside the house, no gibbering and meeping, no rattle of bones or cackling laughter. Why does so much of my life after meeting you two involve entering haunted houses where spooky things are happening? I said. I meant Rain and Evelyn, of course. Better than doing magic in a bedsit, isn't it? Evelyn shot me a sidelong look, heavy with meaning. Besides, it's not haunted, Rain laughed. Into yet another haunted house, I sighed. Another? Evelyn asked. Ours. Oh. My full complement of tentacles unfolded from my sides as we crept up to the front door, blossoming from phantom limbs into rainbow-pulsing pneumosomatic flesh. My bioreactor edged out part of a control rod, preparing me for what might lurk indoors, beyond the dark threshold. A little cephalopod, inching toward the whale fall. I resisted the urge to put on my squid skull mask. I didn't want to frighten any of Twill's family. Rain still had the 3D glasses pushed up the bridge of her nose. She must have caught me in her peripheral vision, because she turned and let out a low wolf whistle. Rain, I huffed. This is hardly the time. It is always time for tentacles, shaman. Keep your claws sharp, Zheng said, on the opposite side of me, and then bounded ahead, taking the brick front step in one hop and ducking her upper half inside the house, checking for predators or trapdoor spiders or worse. Rain was up beside her in an instant, gun pointed at the floor, black knife concealed backhand in her opposite palm. She covered Zheng's back as the demon host peered into the house. They were in sync, working together as one organism. The beauty of their momentary coordination made me feel so much safer. Had they always been like this? Not 2 hours ago they'd been locked in combat, but not a trace of that remained in them now, as if the tension between them had been heated and hammered into a more flexible alloy. The blood which Zheng had smeared on Rain's face was washed off, and the shallow cut across Zheng's belly had closed to nothing more than a thin red line of scar tissue. But something remained, something wordless and unspoken. The previous me would have wanted to step between them, to act as that link, but now they were doing it on their own. Their linkage was far from perfect, however. Rain had to duck Zheng's elbow, Zheng bumped Rain's knife hand. But they shared a look, then carried on. Hey! Twill's voice came from deeper in the house, half muffled by too many canine teeth, calling back to us. It's fine. It's fine, come on in. Then why the bloody scream? Evelyn called back as we mounted the steps. Saw something. Twill shouted. It's fine, there's nothing here. Nothing here, she says, Evelyn hissed. She shook her head and shared a look with Rain and me. I'll keep my eyes peeled, Rain said, tapping the 3D glasses. Peeled and sliced, Preem added, sing-song like she was reciting a line from a child's nursery rhyme. Zheng ducked through the front door of Gearswin Farm. The rest of us followed, traipsing up the bare brick steps and over the painted wooden threshold. Rain kept her handgun pointed at the floor. Evelyn held her scrimshawed thigh-bone under her armpit. I tried to still the racing of my heart, squeezing harder on Evelyn's arm. Twill's home surprised me a second time. I had expected to step inside a renovated farmhouse, like one of those optimistic 1990s converted barns, all structurally pointless dust trap beams set between patches of bare plaster, complete with awful lino floors and an expensive kitchen that clashed with the rest of the building. I'd seen one or two examples of the type before, lovely old houses out on the rural fringes bought up by people with more money than sense, then gutted and hollowed out, their innards replaced like they'd been parasitized, so they were merely a shell over cold and sterile interior design. But instead, the inside of Gearswin Farm's main house looked like it hadn't been remodeled in a very long time. Bare wooden floors had once been waxed and polished, but were now mostly stripped by time and the passing of feet, hidden beneath heavy rugs that at least kept the heat in and cushioned one's tread. Pale orange wallpaper was peeling at the corners and edges, cut back where it could not be saved or repaired, like a ragged sunset. The skirting boards were scuffed, the iron radiators spotted with rust, the door handles tarnished and scratched, but the hinges were well oiled, the screw plates tightened, and the floors clean and tidy. The building smelled of old wood, cooking scents, and fresh linen. Rustic, nothing fake about it. We found ourselves in a long corridor which ran the length of the house, well lit and homey, with a few mountain peak landscape paintings on the walls, nothing fancy, just cheap watercolors, but very nice, very tasteful. Doors led off to the left and right and the corridor terminated in what looked like a sitting room. Some carpeted stairs led upward on the left. Oh, it's not spooky at all. I tooted. I mean, not that I'm disappointed. Far from it. Do we take our shoes off at the door? Rain called down the long hallway. Twill's head, thankfully human, now appeared around a door frame, halfway down on the right, long curls hanging down. Nah. Shut the front door though, yeah. And get in here, this is weird. She vanished into the room again. Evelyn huffed and rolled her eyes. Preem was already shutting the door behind us. Zheng rumbled deep in her throat and craned her head to peer up the stairs, putting one hand on the banister. Evelyn tapped Zheng on the leg with her walking stick. No. Zheng rounded on her slowly, a tiger poked in the backside. Wizard. I steeled myself to jump in, but to my surprise, Evelyn held her ground and held Zheng's gaze. Perhaps that had something to do with how we were literally arm in arm, though she didn't strictly need the support. There are children up there, she said to Zheng, flat and uninterested, as if the matter was already decided. Don't go scaring them. Besides, I added, trying to be diplomatic, you're the strongest here, Zheng. If you run off now, we'll have to carry Nicole ourselves. Strongest, Preem echoed, peering around to catch my eyes with her accusing, milk-white stare. I blushed and spluttered and managed to get a sorry in there somewhere. Zheng chuckled. The wizard's daughter knows better, shaman. And I am not giving in to wanderlust. Instead, I wonder. Rain went visibly tense at the tone in Zheng's voice. Wonder, she asked. Quit with the poetry, Evelyn hissed. What are you talking about? Zheng spread her arms as she stepped past the stairs. Where have the angels gone? Ah, said Rain, peering through the 3D glasses again. Good point. House should be full of them. Where'd they go? Busy doggos, Preem said. Twill's voice echoed down the hallway again. What are you lot doing? Get in here. Let's go talk to their handler then, Evelyn grunted, tightening her arm on mine. Everyone stay alert. If something does jump out at me, I shall scream, I said. I took a deep breath and tried to look scary. It probably didn't work. We found the current nexus of Ringwindlay's shenanigans halfway down the house's spinal corridor, in a smallish room that Twill insisted on calling the Hidan, a sort of supernumerary miniature sitting room with a large television, some wooden bookcases, and a bank of soft armchairs. Children's toys were scattered across one corner and a large glass-filled door looked out onto the back patio, filling the room with reflected green light from the rustling leaves outdoors. Twill and her mother were clustered around a third woman who I vaguely recognized as Amanda Hopton, Twill's aunt. She'd been at the pub meeting with Edward Lilburn, though she hadn't left much of an impression. Thin-faced and sallow from stress, yet also overweight around the middle, she still shared the family resemblance to her sister and niece, with dark curls and a compact frame, but tainted with shaking mania in her eyes. She was also terrified, recoiling as we entered the room, panting in near panic. Mandy, there is nothing here, Christine was saying, trying to catch her sister's panicked arms. There is nothing here. There is nothing inside the house, nothing got past the angels. Mandy, you're safe. Look at me, please. Past the Hopton trio, propped up in an armchair with a blanket over her knees, was Nicole Webb. She looked up at us, making what seemed like perfectly lucid eye contact, though frowning with deep and worried concern. The armchair was much too large for her, robbing the former detective of her usual imposing posture and striking confidence, though her blonde hair was neatly pulled back in its usual professional bun. Her eyes flashed with quick observation, counting us with a flicker, lingering on Zheng. She was dressed for walking, though not for the woods, in a long coat and dark trousers. Her white shirt was dirty and rumpled from her journey through the countryside. Rain cracked a smile as soon as we saw her. Nikki. They ain't got you trussed up. Nicole sighed, as if very tired indeed. Evelyn raised her voice, speaking to Twill and Christine, gesturing at Amanda. What did she see? Excuse me, what did she see? Twill shrugged, grimacing through her teeth, clearly embarrassed. I dunno, it's weird. Usually important to voice these things, I said, in case there's something unexpected about. Putting theory into practice, I quick scanned the corners of the room for dark spots or hanging spider webs or other telltale signs of numismatic trickery, but there was nothing here except old wallpaper and a few stains, though the bookcases were respectably interesting, mostly full of paperback novels and some large-format photography books about nature. Zheng peeled off to stalk around the edge of the room, doing the same thing but with greater accuracy than I could achieve. Nicole turned her head to watch Zheng go, a little perturbed when the demon host passed behind her. It was only a flicker. Amanda said to all of us, batting Christine's hands away. It was only a flicker, but I know what I saw. She trailed off, staring directly at me, all her fear draining away. I suddenly felt awfully self-conscious. Hello? I said. Amanda's cloudy, dazed eyes traveled up and down my body, over my tentacles, her mouth hanging open. Godspit and heaven's light, she murmured. You've gone far. I went red in the face, horrified by the way she was looking at me, eyes full of religious awe. They're only tentacles. Mandy, Christine said, gentle but firm. Now is not the time. Can you concentrate for me, please? Nobody told me you transcended. Amanda took a step toward me, as if in a trance, one hand reaching out, fingers trembling. Instantly rain was between me and her. Behind the enraptured woman, Zheng's hand suddenly came down on her shoulder. Be still, worm, Zheng rumbled. Amanda jumped about a foot in the air, whirling around and staring up at Zheng with almost equal awe. Zheng stared back down at her, baring her teeth. Hey now, Twill warned, edging closer to Zheng. Do not interfere with the shaman, worm thing, Zheng purred in Amanda's face. Do not presume to touch. Rather than collapsing into a puddle of melted butter, Amanda nodded slowly, wetting her lips and taking a moment to breathe. I apologize, she said to Zheng. Are you her messenger? She is beautiful. Zheng rumbled between her teeth with naked disgust, but then let Amanda go with a for her gentle shove. Christine caught Amanda's stumble and shot a frown at Zheng, but Zheng ignored the look and continued her circuit of the room. No, it's my fault, Amanda said, staring at the floor and gathering herself. I was overcome. Overcome. I apologize. She didn't seem that afraid. Perhaps when one spent a significant portion of one's life in direct contact with an outsider god, one did not spook easily, even by 7-foot-tall demon hosts with mouths full of knives. Who was that speaking just then? Evelyn asked slowly. You, Amanda Hopton. Or the thing in your head? Amanda raised her eyes to meet Evelyn, then glanced at me, guilty and ashamed. I think we should leave that question unanswered, for now, please. Christine said, gently, with an awkward smile. This isn't what we're here for. Amanda, are you all right now? Amanda straightened up and sighed, smoothing her dark curls over her head. She had such awful bags under her eyes, too much like I had once been, a wreck on the edge of the abyss. I did see something, she said. Out in the corridor. Just a flicker, but it was right here and it wasn't one of ours. Twill jerked her thumb at the ceiling. The boys, upstairs. Playing pranks. Gareth already ran up there to check on them, Christine said. Pooh, Twill snorted. Making himself useful for once. Bernard's up there. Anyway, Amanda said, sounding very certain. I recalled Bernard from our meeting at the pub. Amanda's large and friendly golden retriever. She seemed to have more confidence in the dog than she did this Gareth fellow. A funny thought crossed my mind, one I'd had so often as a young teenager, trapped and alone in a world inhabited by inexplicable nightmares. Can dogs see spirits? I asked out loud. Bernard can, Amanda answered with a sudden proud smile. Where's Ben, anyway? Twill muttered, sticking her head out into the corridor. I thought he went back out to his car. Amanda replied. Oh dear, Christine sighed. Hey, Nikki, Rain said, heading over to Nicole at last. She put away her pistol and her knife inside her leather jacket. They said you were delirious, but you're being real quiet now. She's improved a little bit, Amanda said. I have no idea what's wrong with her though. I'm sorry. Nicole pulled a pained, embarrassed face, and opened her mouth. 18, but not without reversals. You know the grass on the pitch is not always fed by worms. Truth, lies, pies in the sky. I was never told which way to walk but always how to step. Don't you think this looks strongly broken open already? Why go further? She spoke so confidently that it stunned us all to silence. No, Preem intoned. Nicole sighed and shook her head, making an exasperated shrugging motion with both hands. Rain laughed, then covered her mouth and said sorry for laughing. Jing watched Nicole carefully from across the room. Twill blinked as if she'd been slapped with a glove made of pepper spray. Her language processing is all messed up, Christine said, and I could hear the conditional quotations around her words. And she can't walk in a straight line. She stumbles into the walls when she tries. I've heard of non-supernatural conditions that can cause this, Evelyn said thoughtfully. But I doubt this is anything normal. Too neat for a physical cause. Evelyn finally disentangled her arm from mine, patting my hand in silent thank you. She rolled her shoulders beneath her coat and cream-soft jumper, and stomped across to peer down at Nicole. The detective frowned up at her with the exact expression of a patient with an obscure disease, hoping this doctor would be the one to find a cure. A spiral-bound notebook lay on the arm of the chair. Evelyn frowned down at it. You tried writing instead of speaking, she asked. Accidental inversionary principle, Nicole sighed, but her tone made her meaning clear. Pretty much the same result, Amanda said. There is something in her. In her voice and her tongue. Broken her. All right, Evelyn said to Nicole. She pulled her scrimshod thigh bone out from beneath her own armpit, slipping the gruesome magic wand into her hands, settling her walking stick against the chair. Just nod or shake your head. Can you do that? Nicole nodded. She sighed again, sharp and harsh, irritated at her own inability to communicate. I opened my mouth to reassure her, though I didn't know what to say, but Evelyn got there first. It isn't your fault, Evelyn snapped. Well, it might be your fault that you got into this situation in the first place, I don't know yet. Jam and butter and dead snails, Nicole argued back. But, Evelyn said, making a motion like she wanted to bop Nicole on the nose with her bone wand, the verbal diarrhea is not your fault. You can't control your body, whatever this is. Now stop with the self-pity and answer my questions. Nicole nodded, rolling her eyes. Did you stop the investigation into Edward Lilburn's property? Nicole nodded. Did you pack away the stolen documents like we asked? Nicole nodded again. Did you look at them at all after that phone conversation we had? Nicole shook her head. Evelyn and Nicole, the mage and the private eye, went on this way for about 2 or 3 minutes, a one-sided conversation punctuated by short pauses for Evelyn to frown and suck on her teeth and formulate the next question. Through careful phrasing, she rapidly drew out most of the relevant details, at least the ones that Nicole could communicate without further explanation. According to her increasingly encouraged nodding, she had done exactly as we'd asked. She'd packed the stolen documents away, put them from her mind, and turned her energies toward other paying work. She had expected a phone call and visit from us tomorrow, perhaps to pick up the documents and ritually burn them to exorcise whatever influence they were exerting. And you don't remember how you ended up in the woods? Evelyn asked. Nicole sighed and shrugged, but would neither shake nor nod to that one. Where were you, Sherrowford? Shake. Nearby. The countryside. Shake again, lips pursed. Manchester. Nicole nodded. Rain let out a whistle. You went pretty far in a fugue state, huh? Nicole huffed a non-laugh. She was not amused by any of this. Your car is still up Manchester way, you think? Rain asked. Nicole nodded, pulling a very exasperated face. Evelyn grumbled. She began moving her hands slowly over the scrimshaw designs in her bone wand. My stomach tightened at the sight of that. Whenever she'd used that thing before, the effects had caused terrible backwash. But then she paused and gestured with vague irritation back at Rain. Give me the glasses, I need to look at her properly. Oh, there's nothing strange about her, I supplied, as Rain handed Evelyn the glasses. I can't see anything abnormal. Still, Evelyn said. Let's see what we can see. Right, detective? Nicole pulled a dubious face, but held still as Evelyn leaned in close, examining her through the absurd red and blue lenses of the modified 3D glasses. We all stood awkwardly watching for a moment before Evelyn sighed again. Don't all watch me, please, she grumbled. Christine cleared her throat, shuffling her feet. Right, of course. Twill, would you be a dear and go check on Gareth, please? Twill shrugged. Sure, I guess. I'll come up too, Amanda said. I'd like to reassure the boys. This has frightened them. Bring Bernard back down, hey. Rain said with a wink and a laugh. I want to meet the dog again. I wasn't really paying attention as Twill and her aunt left the room. I was so focused on Evelyn and Nicole, on the way Evelyn kept adjusting her position around the detective's chair, as if she hoped to reveal a secret door in the poor woman's head which she might reach out and open and so discover what had happened to her. I squinted at Nicole, but my natural pneumosomatic sight revealed nothing, no runes scrawled on her skin, no ghostly apparition clinging to her back with bony fingers inserted in her language center. But Evelyn kept adjusting her grip across the symbols and circles on her bone wand. The sight made my skin crawl. I was uncomfortably reminded that I had no idea of the true intricacies of what I was looking at. The house creaked gently in the wind, soft and slow, at one with the trees beyond. The hounds are still missing, Zheng rumbled at the back of the room. Hounds? Christine asked. You mean Windla's angels? That's right, Rain grunted. They were all cramming themselves into the house after you and Twill. A pause. I was still watching Evelyn. That is strange, Christine said. You're certain? And they're not in here with us now? One moment, I'm sorry, I must check. I heard the sound of her stepping out into the corridor, footsteps swallowed by the angles of the house. Then another pair of footsteps followed her, quick and tripping, as if hopping out not to follow, but just to check which way she was going. Shaman, Zheng rumbled. I snapped up and around from watching Evelyn and Nicole. The tone in Zheng's voice was full of warning. She was frozen stiff at the back of the room, watching the doorway to the corridor with the fixed expression of a tiger staring down an armed hunter. Preem stood a little way from her, hands clasped, back straight, also staring right at the open door. Nobody else was there. Christine had left the room, of course. Had Rain ducked out into the corridor after her? Zheng. I said, my belly going cold and my blood suddenly full of adrenaline, though I didn't know why. Rain. Rain. I raised my voice slightly. Something is wrong here, Shaman, Zheng rumbled. Where's Rain? I demanded, stepping forward. But Zheng held out a hand to block me. All is calm, Preem intoned. All is quiet. This is bad. What are you lot going on about? Evelyn straightened up, huffing and cursing under her breath. Will you shut up and let me concentrate for Rain? I called past Zheng's arm. The hyena cannot hear us. None can, Zheng purred. She turned to look at Preem for a moment. Watch them, she said. Then Zheng stalked forward, out through the door and into the wooden hallway with its heavy rugs and tasteful paintings. She slunk like a stalking cat, ready to spring left or right at the slightest movement, at the first sign of danger or challenge or unexplained presence. I had no idea what was going on, but even if Rain hadn't suddenly vanished into thin air, the set and pose of Zheng's shoulders, the ripple of her muscles beneath her clothes, the silent creep of her feet, it all sent a shiver of adrenaline and fear up my spine. In her long coat, she was some avenging devil from the pit, and I was very glad she was on our side. My bioreactor shunted an entire control rod free and my tentacles arched out, making myself look big, following an instinct to back Zheng up against some unseen predator. But nothing happened. Zheng stepped into the corridor, looked left and right, then grunted, eyes flashing like pools of dark oil. "Zheng." I hissed, heart racing. "There is nothing here, shaman. There is nobody else breathing in this house." "You cannot know," Preem said. "There is nobody else in this house," Zheng repeated. "What?" I boggled at her. Behind me, Evelyn swallowed on such a dry mouth that I heard her throat bob. "Zheng, what is going on? This is just a doorway." "There's nothing." Zheng made to move left, to take a step down the corridor. "No." Evelyn snapped in panic. "Stay together. Stay in the room." The fear and terror in Evelyn's voice shocked me into unthinking action. I darted forward to grab Zheng with my tentacles, to anchor her here, to keep her close, but I was too late. Zheng stepped to the left, around the door frame. She was out of line of sight for less than a second, obscured by the angle of the architecture for less time than it took me to stumble forward, barreling after her, out through the doorway. I felt Preem's hand, firm and strong, try to grab one of my tentacles. But I slipped away, too intent on Zheng. To say I am not steady on my feet is rather an understatement. I bounced and staggered out into the spinal hallway, expecting to round the door frame and hook my hands into the back of Zheng's coat. She wasn't there. Nothing was there, just empty hallway and open doors, terminating in the large sitting room. Sunlight arced in through the windows. The trees rustled beyond the house. I almost crashed right into the opposite wall in shock, catching myself with my tentacles like an octopus floating against a rock. "Zheng," I said out loud. But she simply wasn't there. "Zheng, where?" Oh no. A dark pit opened in my stomach as I hurled myself back at the door to the den, all but skidding inside, eyes darting left and right. Preem was nowhere to be seen. Evelyn was gone too. Nicole's chair was empty. Sunlight poured in through the window set into the back door. The woods waited beyond the little patio and the potted plants and the mud. Everything else was exactly as it should be, from the discarded toys on the floor to the silent television at the opposite end of the room. All around me, the old farmhouse creaked gently in the distant wind, in time with the treetops outdoors. For just a moment, my breath stuck in my throat. Fear stood on a knife edge of heart muscle and tentacle tip, as my extra limbs coiled and curled around me, their semi-independent instinct just as confused as I was. Then, with shaking hands, I pulled my squid skull mask out of my tentacles and lowered it over my own head. Metallic refuge, armor of the soul, my true face on the exterior. I stared out at the peeling wallpaper and old floorboards through the many eye sockets, and forced a deep, shaking breath into my lungs. I turned in a slow circle, taking in the whole room, just in case some lurking shadow was about to pounce on me from behind. I wet my lips, then found I was chewing my tongue, and forced myself to stop. "Be rational," I whispered to myself. "Stay calm. You've seen this kind of thing before. Heather, you know what this is." I stepped back out into the corridor, just to check it hadn't extended off to infinite length. It hadn't, thankfully. Then I went back into the den to see if anything might change, but nothing did. None of my friends and family reappeared. So much for that easy way out. This is like the loop trap from Willow House, I said out loud, speaking to the air, to myself, or to the house itself. Like the trap the Sherrowford cult used on us. We've all been peeled off from each other. Into different versions of the building. Am I right? Nothing and nobody answered. The trees beyond the walls filled my silence with the rustle of leaves in the wind. Because there's no other way Zhang could have vanished so fast, I said. Unless you ate her. A pause. I huffed, feeling absurd. By you, I mean the house. Are you listening to me? The house did not answer. I stepped back out into the corridor. My tentacles were tense and coiled hard enough to make all my back muscles ache and my stomach hurt. I have been lost and alone and beyond help in much scarier places than this, I said, raising my voice so it carried up and down the spine of the building. And I can just slip away. I can slip out, go back home, and return here with an outsider godling, my fiancé, who loves me and will do anything for me. Do you want to face that? Do you want that? I tried to sound confident and defiant, but my heart was fluttering and my stomach was roiling. Who am I talking to? I went on. If this is your doing, ringy, I was so anxious that I stumbled over the stupid name. Cringe face, I spat instead. If this is your doing, then I don't understand what you're trying to communicate or achieve by threatening me and my friends, because you are making me very angry. Nothing replied. No bubble servitor came hurtling down the hallway. No knife shadow rose from the narrow gaps between the floorboards. It's not you though, is it? You're too cautious for this. I sighed. The fight went out of me. Oh, I'm talking to the walls. Always knew I'd end up like this, crazy Heather, talking to thin air. Speaking self-mockery out loud helped to ground me, keep my feet rooted in the normal and the real as I headed back up the length of the corridor, making for the front door. What is it with mages and these absurd spatial distortions? You all just love doing this, warping space. The cult did it, Alexander did it. Orange juice did it. Wake up in the morning and warp yourself down to breakfast without moving. Perverse. You don't see Evelyn doing this, do you? And that's part of why I love her, no warping our house into a tangled knot of corridors. No walking through a bedroom to reach the bathroom. No absurd, tacky columns. I worked myself up into a rant, like a child whistling in the dark, trying to resist the urge to scream or run. I kept glancing back over my shoulder, tentacles bracing to cover every doorway I passed. There was an answer to this place, of course. Hyperdimensional mathematics could define a dozen houses, all identical, superimposed over each other. But why? For what purpose? If this was a maze in which we'd been lured apart from each other, what lay at the center of the maze? Maybe nothing. If I allowed myself to dwell on that question, the right equations would present themselves, oil-slick and dripping blackness, from the sump at the bottom of my soul. But I was alone. If I passed out now, with a nosebleed and a pounding headache, I had no idea what might scoop me up. I reached the front door, slapped the latch down so I wouldn't have to acknowledge my own shaking hands, and then grabbed the door handle. I swear, whoever or whatever is doing this, if I open this door and there's another identical corridor instead of the actual outdoors, I'm going to start punching holes in the scenery. Snapping my words to summon courage I didn't feel, I yanked on the door handle, tentacles poised to catch whatever gibbering monster was about to fall upon me. Brick doorstep, crumbly tarmac, 3 cars including Rains, sitting right where we'd left it. Tumbledown stables with the ragged fields beyond. All ringed by the dark promise of the tree line and the deeper woods. A sigh of exasperated relief escaped my lips. What's the point of confusing us like this if you leave the outdoors the same? I hissed, stepping down onto the tarmac with my arms folded, as if to keep my fluttering heart inside my ribs. Part of me wanted to run to Rain's car and huddle in the back seat like a scared child, but I swallowed and forced myself to look up at the house. All Fringewindla's bubble servitors were gone, missing from their guard posts on the roof. Or rather, They were probably still out there in actual, unmodified reality, just not reflected here in whatever set of tangled pocket dimensions we'd been dragged into. Unless I'm the only one standing in actual reality, I murmured, biting my bottom lip and frowning up at the dark windows and quiet, red brick of the Hopton family home. And everyone else has been snatched away. All except me. If this was a trap for my friends, I needed to reconnect with them, fast. Just as I was about to step back indoors, an indistinct shadow passed behind one of the upstairs windows. I froze, staring up at the dark squares of glass, half hoping it would pass again, half praying it did not return. Then I found my courage by spreading my tentacles wide. Let the monsters try me. Hello. I shouted. Hello. Whoever's at the window, I'm down here. It's me. The shadow lurched back into view, smeared across the glass like a misshapen parody of flesh and cloth. A fumble with a catch and the window sprang open on well-oiled hinges. I braced for a nightmare to pour out. Heather. Rain leaned out of the window, beaming and laughing from the second floor. Oh my goodness, Rain, I heaved her name, going weak and shaky all of a sudden, pressing one hand over my racing heart. Is that really you or is this some trick? Really real. Real as real can be. Rain shot me a wink. I couldn't help but notice she had her pistol in one hand. She had to raise her voice slightly to cover the distance between us. I would ask, hey, where'd the party go, but I'm guessing there's some major mojo going down right now. You can say that again, I huffed, then pulled my squid skull mask off so she could see my face clearly. Everyone vanished one by one, as soon as we were out of sight for more than a second or two. Did you experience the same thing? Yeah, Rain sighed. Remind you of anything? Exactly. This is just like with Willow House. I nodded, finding relief in sharing the assessment. Stupid spooky nonsense, really. Except this time, Zheng's on our side. Rain beaming with confidence. Anything actually happened? You seen anything gribbly lurking about? I shook my head. Not a single thing. It's just empty. It's like we're all in the same space but can't see each other. Or in different versions of the same building, side by side but separate. Same here. Though, Rain cleared her throat and glanced over her shoulder, back into the house. The corridors are getting kinda tangled, for me. Like Willow House, but worse. Worse? Kinda. Also our phones aren't working. She tapped her jacket. I tried calling you, but there's no signal. I rummaged in my hoodie for my phone and found that Rain was correct. My phone had no signal. Did this mean we were outside, or just very deep in the woods? I sighed and felt a very strong desire to rub the bridge of my nose. This is absurd, I said. What is the point of this? Maybe there isn't a point, Rain said, leaning further out of the window and frowning at the ground. Maybe this is like a natural phenomenon. What on earth is natural about this? I shrugged with all my tentacles. Nicole can't walk straight or speak straight, right? Then we get in a room with her, trying to find out what she knows, and suddenly we can't navigate straight either. Oh. I frowned. I suppose that's plausible. It is a bit of a leap, though. Sometimes you gotta leap. Rain blew out a puff and shrugged at the ground. But I think if I leap from here to join you, I might break my ankles. This is a long drop, even if I hang from the windowsill. Please be careful. I squeaked. Rain shot me a wink. Sure will, don't you worry. But we gotta reassemble somehow. You think Evie is by herself right now? Actually she and Preem were together, hopefully they stayed that way. You still got your tentacles out? Oh, of course. Rain nodded. I can't see, left the glasses with Evie. You think you could climb up here? I chewed on my bottom lip again, eyeing the unornamented brickwork and the various narrow windowsills. I don't know. I've never even climbed a tree. Even with all my tentacles, that's a lot. You certain? Rain asked, no pressure in her voice, no value judgment, just an honest request. I swallowed. We did need to avoid being separated again. I could leap, maybe. Like a spring. But you'd have to catch me, I'm not sure I can grab the window with any accuracy. Rain, why not just come downstairs and step out of the front door? Maybe if I close it first. Maybe. If the house always opens to the same outdoors, that's probably the best way to link up, but we can't be certain. Rain trailed off, her eyes going past me. I turned but saw nothing there, no sudden monster melting out of the tree line, no dark figure on the tarmac. Just the parked cars and the fields and the swaying trees, leaves rustling in the ever-present wind. Heather, get back indoors. Now, she called down to me. Rain. She'd gone stony-faced, ready to do violence. What's wrong? Get back indoors, she repeated. I'll head down to the front door and maybe we'll be able to link up. If not, she paused, biting her lip too. If not. I shook my head. Rain, it's normal out here. What are you seeing? Your car is right there, even. Rain laughed without humor, indulgent but pained as she smiled at me. Heather, you always were bad with cars. That's not mine. None of that out there is ours. A cold knife slid into my belly as I turned back to re-examine our surroundings. Rain was right, that was not her car standing on the tarmac. The shape of the body was subtly wrong, unlike any real car, as if the angles had all been flipped in such a way that was not obvious, unless one stared for a few seconds and really thought about what a car should look like. The other two cars parked out there were much the same, especially the Land Rover, which was the right color green but the wrong shade, as if it had sat in the sun for 50 years, slowly bleaching. The fields were worse. How often do you really look at grass? Because none of that was grass. It was wriggling. In waves. The thistles and little saplings and tall weeds were none of those things, they were flesh in imitation of plant, writhing and flexing and twitching in what I had thought was the wind. The little cluster of sheep with their pair of alpacas were neither sheep nor alpaca either. They had horns, black and curved and visible even at this distance, and they were all facing the house, facing us, with faces that looked all too human. Rain, I murmured. Get indoors. Now. I backed up a step toward the open door, tentacles fumbling my squid skull mask back over my head, trying to hide. Are we outside? I don't think so, Rain called down to me. It doesn't feel like outside. Heather, get indoors, I'll be right down. But you won't be here. I squeaked. We're not inhabiting the same space. Where even is this? Where? My mouth went dry as I realized the worst thing of all, the driveway and the road were gone, swallowed up by the forest. And it was a forest now, not merely a patchwork quilt of woodland, scattered across the English countryside, where it was possible to walk in a straight line for less than an hour and always reach a road. The forest had marched forward onto the farm grounds, with thick gnarled roots that plunged into the earth like digging fingers, or worms. I couldn't see a scrap of light through the trees, not a single sliver of distant sky or open ground. They stood in ranks hundreds of miles deep. Heather. Heather, get indoors. But then we'll be cut off again. Screw it, executive decision time. I heard the sound of Rain's feet finding the windowsill. Stay right there. Rain, don't hurt yourself, don't. Darkness thickened beyond the tree line, as if night was falling, out in the woods. Shadows seemed to press inward, crawling across the narrow dome of sky visible through the break in the canopy. Wind howled through the trunks and thrashed the leaves. An oncoming storm, out of nowhere. My attention was off Rain for perhaps 2 seconds. The window banged shut. I looked up, but Rain was gone. She hadn't climbed out or dropped to the ground, she'd just vanished. Again. Oh, for pity's sake, I hissed at the absurdity of it all. I tried to stand tall as premature night rolled over the farm, swallowing up the fields and the monstrous sheep within. It blanketed the cars and pooled around their wheels, ate up the mud and the crumbly tarmac and nipped at my heels as I hopped up onto the brick steps. It pressed against the walls of the house, suddenly held back only by the semicircle of light spilling from the front door. "It is not night time," I said, sounding a lot more defiant than I felt, hugging myself with both arms. "This is nonsense. This isn't even happening." The darkness thickened further, as if forming hands or tentacles out beyond the house. I scrambled inside, slammed the front door, and threw the latch. Then I backed away, praying nothing was about to thump against the thin wood. Nothing did. I turned back to the long spinal corridor of the house, panting to catch my breath and slow my racing heart. My tentacles were all a-whirl with frustration and panic. The lights indoors kept out the bizarre, creeping darkness, but there was no longer any warm sunlight pouring in through distant windows. Rain did not appear, no matter how long I waited. Neither did anybody else. The corridor, mute and bland, invited me to explore. I was in a haunted house, in the middle of the night, by myself. "If this you're doing, Edward," I whispered, "then when we catch you, I'm going to have Rain put your head in a toilet and flush it." Alone in a haunted house, surrounded by the wailing wind of an oncoming storm, the tree trunks of a forest that had marched from nowhere, and the dark claws of a premature, unnatural, cloying night. Separated from my comrades and lovers, taunted by space that made no sense, left with only my wits and my meager strength to see me through. The lamplit corridor beckoned, lined with watercolor mountain vistas and doors that could lead to anywhere. My whispered threat to have Rain put Edward Lilburn's head down a toilet did not summon the owlish old man from around one of the door frames, like a puppet master stepping out from behind the curtain. I would have preferred if he had appeared, at least then I'd have something to slap. "Oh, I'm as bad as Rain sometimes," I hissed to myself, inside the safety of my cephalopod mask. Can't solve a problem unless you can punch it, really. The me of 9 months ago would have found a cupboard or perhaps the space under a bed, curled up in a ball, and sobbed myself to sleep, in the hope that I would be safe and home once I woke up. Like a cut-price Dorothy who couldn't even be bothered to tap her magic slippers together. Even the me of 6 weeks back, prior to my unplanned outing to Carcosa, would have been paralyzed with fear at being cut off from Rain and Evelyn, scattered to the far corners of this bizarre trap. But that Heather was not in charge anymore. She was not forced to make decisions in the grip of terror, buffeted by ineffable forces beyond her understanding. My squid skull mask, my abdominal reactor organ, and my 6 beautiful, rainbow-strobing tentacles were only the outward heralds of a much more meaningful alchemy, deep in my heart, where the old me was wrapped tight and cradled safe. Which is a fancy way of trying to explain why I huffed, stamped my foot, and shouted at the top of my lungs. "Hello." I drew out the word right to the edge of a scream. My voice echoed away down the long spinal corridor of Twill's house, unanswered by bare wood and old wallpaper, soaked up by lino and carpet, but more than loud enough to penetrate every corner. Nobody answered. I stood there panting, getting my breath back. "All right, so there's nobody here but me," I said out loud. As if I believed that for a single second. This is absurd. Thump went a heavy knock against the wood of the front door, right behind me. I strangled a yelp, spinning on the spot, then had to grit my teeth and swallow hard to stop myself from hissing like a goated lizard at the inside of the closed door. All my tentacles were out wide, making me look big and intimidating to whatever shadow-spawned nightmare was about to burst the latch and splinter the wood. But nothing did. Not even a second thump. Wind howled, treetops rustled, beams creaked so I couldn't be certain, when I thought I heard something padding away from the door on bare feet. I stood there panting like a fool, scared out of my wits for a long minute as my tentacles retracted and my heart rate lowered. "I am not putting up with this," I snapped. I am not. You stop this right now. I dosed myself up with my own irritation like a hit of diazepam to chase away the fear. It partially worked, though it was mostly for show, in case hidden eyes were watching from dark corners. Abyssal instinct whispered imperatives to stay defiant, show no weakness, do not hesitate, as if I was deep in a warren of predators, among the rocks with the flesh-eaters, puffing myself up to convince them that attacking me was too much of a risk. Maybe that instinct was right. Perhaps we were among hidden predators. Rain was right too, about our mobile phones not working. That didn't stop me from trying. The phone dutifully told me that I had no signal, that I was out beyond the borders of civilization, but I called Rain's number all the same, just to see if the line would connect. It didn't, giving me the usual out-of-service range tone. This farm isn't that isolated, I said with an irritated sigh, tucking the phone away and talking to the walls again. It's 15 minutes on foot to a small town. There's probably a mast within jogging distance. This isn't exactly convincing, do you understand that? I faced the mute corridor, chewing my tongue behind my mask, weighing my options. Slip, or stay. If I slipped out preferably to Camelot as a slingshot to take me back to Sherrowford and home and help, then I might not be able to return, even if I fetched Sevens and Lozzie and came back to this house all over again. I might be stuck on the exterior surface of this trap, whatever it really was. That is, if this was just a trap, rather than the conscious working of some outsider mind, poised to fight me if I tried to leave. If I did decide to flee to get help, I might only have one shot, one chance to slip away before the jaws closed around my leg. And I wouldn't leave my friends and comrades to that fate. If this was anything like that night with Uran Ju, if we were in something's gullet, then the threat of my toxic abyssal poison might be the only thing stopping the trap from swallowing us whole. No, I had to stay, in case the others would die without me here to poison the dish. This doesn't feel anything like Mr. Orange Juice, though, I muttered behind my mask, gathering my courage to creep down the corridor. Come on, Heather. Bottom floor first. Let's find a spooky door and enslap some ghosts. Slap some ghosts? I winced at myself. Rain would be proud. Twill's home, Gearswin Farm, would have been a lovely old house to explore by the light of day, preferably with Rain or Evelyn or anybody else at my side, but it was significantly less lovely during this artificially imposed fake night, complete with winds making the beams creak and the roof tiles rattle, like I was inside a ship at sea. Still, at least this wasn't a modern house, that would have been even worse, a true nightmare of anonymous walls and inhuman angles, work surfaces never used or touched by human hands or care, every architectural turn suggesting habitation but never quite invoking the reality of living presence. At least tiptoeing down this spinal corridor felt like I was surrounded by a house that somebody loved. And then I stopped tiptoeing, because why bother? I'm here, and you are going to have to deal with me. I checked the doors on the left and right as I made for the sitting room at the end of the hallway, hoping against hope that I would come across one of the others, passed out or something which would explain why nobody had answered my shout. Or perhaps I would run into one of the bubble servitors. At least then I could remotely interrogate Hringwindla. Failing those, I might find some clue as to what was going on, or at least provoke a reaction. My tentacles stayed poised and ready, hovering like scorpion stingers, edging around each door frame. I kept my mask on, my hands free. The den, as Twill had called it, was still empty, just armchairs and the television and some books, and the limitless, thick night pressing in on the back door to the patio. The other doors revealed equally empty domestic absences, a cloakroom full of waxed coats and Wellington boots, exactly suited to a walk in the woods, a boiler room with one of those ancient standing water heaters, a washing machine, tumble dryer, and a big chest freezer. I checked inside that, in case a meat monster was about to leap out, but it was all just frozen vegetables and chicken nuggets. A spare downstairs bedroom looked like it hadn't been used in a long time, boxes and packaging piled up at one end. I found a tiny study with neatly stacked papers atop a broad wooden desk, along with a truly ancient computer which even I could tell was about 20 years out of date. The final door led into the kitchen, which seemed to wrap around to join the large sitting room. Their kitchen was beautiful, straight out of one of my teenage fantasies of living in a combination castle cottage in the Cotswolds. Slate and tile surfaces, pots and utensils hanging on the walls, sideboards of pale stone rather than modern formica, a true holdover from another age. The room's centerpiece was one of those huge multi-purpose combination oven boiler things, made of cream-painted metal. Pipes ran from the massive oven into the ceiling, pipes that had once provided central heating for the whole house, feeding the iron radiators I'd spotted in some of the other rooms. It even had a little door where you could choose to fuel it with wood rather than gas or oil. I reminded myself to ask Twill's mother about that oven, if we came out the other side of this bizarre incident in one piece. I wanted to know how old it was. It was like a visitor from the distant past. "You're beautiful," I told it. But my pleasure drained away as my footsteps tapped across the pale terracotta tiles of the kitchen floor, heading for the connecting door into the sitting room. What I'd thought was a sitting room was more of a dining room. A large wooden table dominated the space, probably quite fancy once upon a time, with little ribbed carvings down the legs and a smooth expanse of varnished cream orange wood for the top, though now it was chipped and pitted and scratched from decades of use, but still given pride of place, along with the matching chairs. The rest of the room boasted a pair of sofas, a traditional sideboard cabinet full of crockery, a huge fireplace that seemed to have been used recently, a wonderful pair of enlarged photographs on the walls which looked like pictures of the very woods that lay beyond the house, and a bank of windows, split down the middle by a pair of glass patio doors. Night loomed beyond the windows, as impenetrable as the abyss. I glanced around the room to make sure nothing was going to ambush me. I even looked under the table and poked my head into the little closed cubbyhole-style cupboard, which was full of random junk, a vacuum cleaner, and some wrapping paper. Only then did I creep over to the windows. They were supposed to be looking out over the back patio, but I could see only a scrap of ground. The artificial darkness outdoors pressed in like a wall of fog. Barely 3 or 4 inches of the back patio was visible in the overspill of light from indoors. I could hear the tortured creak and moan of trees and the storm-tossed sound of the leaves in the high winds, but none of it was visible beyond the wall of night. "It's mid-afternoon in May," I sighed. "You're not fooling anybody." In Carcosa I almost got eaten by sentient darkness, and I responded by trying to cause a nuclear explosion. "Do you want me to do that here?" "Yes." "You want me to blow you up?" Nobody and nothing replied. "You're not listening to this, are you, Sevens? If you're here, if you followed us, please show yourself. I need some help. I won't be angry that you followed us, just please." Sevens was not here. I tried to set my shoulders and look irritated, tried to channel Evelyn at her worst or best, depending on what one thought of her, but it didn't quite work. I was very thankful for my pink hoodie, the armor of my soul. I even rolled my left sleeve up a little so I could run my fingers over the fractal on my forearm, my original safety blanket. "Fine," I hissed. "I'll check upstairs. If I don't find anybody, I shall unravel this place with my mind." "You think you're strong enough to fight that?" "I am the daughter of an outsider god, this nonsense is beyond me." Barely believed the words I was saying, but I had to keep up appearances. Then, thunder split the night. I was just about to turn away from the window when the crash of the storm hit, one of those split-second crack-boom thunderclaps that comes from roiling silence and makes you jump like a startled rabbit. Or maybe that's just me. Lightning flashed in the same instant, as if the storm was right above the house, throwing everything into stark illumination. The lashing trees, thick as a primordial forest, the writhing, wriggling ungrass, out there between the tree line and the house, the potted plants, meat pretending to be vegetable matter, the mud, thick and cloying, like soil mixed with blood. And one of the alpacas, from the back field. It was standing barely 10 meters from the house, out in the open, staring directly through the patio doors, right at me. Black horns curved from the sides of its head, coal dust dark. A human face with blank, fish-like eyes caught the flash of lightning. Bared teeth held a lipless grimace. Then the darkness slammed back down, concealing all. Adrenaline pounded through my head. Oh, very original, I spat, though to my surprise I wasn't actually afraid, more annoyed. What, am I supposed to be scared of an alpaca with a human face? I've spent half my life seeing worse monsters around every corner. You're going to have to do better than that. A spooky alpaca, really? As the adrenaline drained away, my anger grew. I genuinely had been lost and alone in scarier places than this. There was something parodic about this situation, the darkness, the being cut off from each other, the unexplained storm, and now a lightning flash at the exact moment I was looking outdoors. Like we were trapped by the logic of a Scooby-Doo episode. I was a little afraid, of course I was. I didn't want to have to fight off a weird alpaca with my tentacles. But deep down, I'd seen far worse. I'd been outside. I'd been to the court of the Yellow King. It's like this is all a bad joke. After the lightning flash, the shadows had regathered around the patio doors, but they had also disgorged a curiously coherent shape. Or maybe it had been there all along, and the lightning had ruined its concealment. Diaphanous skirts of ruffled rippling flesh, translucent camouflage to blend in with the shadows, surrounded a creature the size of a small pony, currently clinging to the outside edge of the patio doors with a set of 8 thick, hooked climbing limbs. Part funnel web spider, part deep-sea giant squid, part lizard, the thing was armor-plated in pus white, covered in scales and bristles, looking like an abandoned war machine. A big bulbous abdomen was tucked in close to the body, like a hound tucking its tail between its legs. A dozen cone-shaped metallic eyes, situated like a spider's, stared back at me, half retracted for protection against the whipping winds. A sharp beak was buried in there somewhere, working up and down with nervous energy, surrounded by a set of 7 segmented tentacles and the stub of an 8th. What are you doing here? I recognized this creature. It was Edward Lilburn's amalgam servitor, the very same one I'd fought off at the home of Amy Stack's son and his father, Shuja Yusufzai. Back then, Edward Lilburn had piloted the creature directly, like an animal with some kind of cartoon logic control collar. I'd had to make contact with it and then use hyperdimensional mathematics to chase Edward out of its mind and break his control over the poor thing. In the aftermath, we'd surmised that it had probably started life as an actual pneumosomatic creature, just another spirit, but it had been experimented on and modified, its own willpower hollowed out and supplanted by the old mage himself. Evelyn believed he probably didn't have the techniques to construct a true servitor, so this was the next best solution to the lack of spirit muscle. The last I'd seen of the thing, it had been fleeing across the rooftops of Sherrowford, running on pure instinct, free of the evil wizard making it do his bidding. "Are you trying to ambush me?" I said out loud, but I didn't think this was a repeat attempt. The first time the amalgam servitor had ambushed us had been perfect, like a spider from an invisible trap. Now it looked more like a spider stuck in a bathtub, out of its context, exposed and threatened by the unnatural darkness, same as me. The 7-jointed, segmented tentacles were not extended in a search for prey, but wrapped around its own body in a protective ball. The thing was terrified. In response to the sound of my voice, it shuffled closer to the patio door, which was a little disconcerting because I was looking at the thing's underside, and it was very large indeed. Metal cone eyes swiveled to look out at the darkness, then back to me. The creature's tentacles pulled tighter, rearmoring itself against the whipping winds and the lurking alpaca with a human face. "Yes, you and me both," I said in sympathy, shaking my head. "Are you asking to be let indoors?" It click-clacked further to the side, clear of the door handle. The big sharp beak opened and closed several times. I bit my bottom lip, caught between natural sympathy for something so much like myself. Those tentacles were impressive and beautiful, in their own way, and wariness of the amalgam servitor, not to mention what might lie in the darkness beyond. "You're definitely not with Edward anymore, right?" I sighed heavily. "I've no way of being sure." Cone eyes blinked. The thing looked so pitiful. Under Edward's control and direction, it had been a thing of meticulous planning. The moment I had set it free, it had reverted to instinct. What I saw now was not a perfectly poised trap, but a frightened arachnid. "I don't know," I murmured, squinting out at the darkness. "If I open the door, is something going to rush in here?" "Are you? No, you're terrified, you're still free." The amalgam servitor pressed itself tighter against the glass. The wind pulled and dragged at its delicate black membranes. That looked painful. "Oh, fine," I hissed. "Preem would never let me live it down if I left a spider to die. But if this is a trick, then you're going outside. Understand?" The brass latch turned without resistance. The wind reached inside like a fist, slamming me in the front and face so hard that I had to anchor myself with my tentacles. I huddled behind the door, safe inside my mask, as the amalgam servitor scurried inside, a mass of clawed limb and segmented tentacle wrapped in black membranes and shivering all over. Try as I might to suppress the gut reaction, I still flinched as the thing shot past me. Anybody would, so close to a squid lizard thing the size of a pony. I had to use half my tentacles to slam the door shut again. My noodle arms weren't enough to defy the force of the unnatural storm winds. As I slapped the latch back into place, another rolling crack boom of thunder made me jump and hiss. The lightning in the clouds lit the landscape and revealed the alpaca with horns and a human face, now only 6 feet from the patio doors. Before the night rushed back in, I saw crimson smears and scraps of flesh between its grimace-grinning teeth. Then all was darkness and wind once more. Oh, bugger off. I snapped at the window. Then I turned, rather absurdly, to the amalgam servitor, and added, "Sorry. Sorry, I didn't mean you. Sorry for swearing." I wasn't even sure if the numismatic creature could understand me, but I didn't need to be an expert in supernatural body language to see that it was still terrified. The spider-squid thing had crammed itself against the back wall of the sitting room, trying to jam itself into a secluded corner and wrap itself about with those black, floating membranes of false shadow. All its metal cone eyes were turned on the patio doors and the darkness beyond. It wasn't interested in ambushing me, not in the slightest. It wanted to hide. Stepping toward it and away from the window, I extended my hand, palm up, shaking only a tiny bit. It recoiled, trying to make itself smaller. Metal cone eyes whirred and clicked at me, like camera lenses. "Okay," I sighed. "Fair enough. I was responsible for you pulling off one of your own legs, after all. You haven't fallen back under Edward's control or anything, have you? If you had, you would be the lethal secret in the trap, not scared out of your wits. Correct?" Cone eyes withdrew into mottled flesh, then poked back out. Was that a yes, or a no, or a please stop talking ape thing and let me hide? Your presence here doesn't actually answer anything, you know that? I snapped, huffing with irritation. In fact, it only raises more questions. Were you the thing that Amanda Hopton saw in the hallway? How did you get past the bubble servitors? Or have you been here, I mean here, inside this cartoon-haunted house, all along? This doesn't make any sense. The spider-squid crawled slowly up the wall, trying to wedge itself into the corner between wall and ceiling, watching me like I was its natural predator. Unless you went back to Edward, I mused. For revenge. Or because it was the only place you knew. And then Nicole comes along, and you follow her back out, you follow her here, from Edward's house. Maybe. Mr. Double Spider or Miss Double Spider, I couldn't actually tell, provided an answer by curling up even tighter, segmented tentacles wrapped around itself like a ball of armor. Fair enough, I sighed. Well, stay here if you want, but I am going to check upstairs, before a spooky alpaca crashes through that door. Crack boom went the thunder. Lightning split the darkness a third time. The alpaca was right up against the glass. A human face with fish-like eyes and a bloody mouth, smearing crimson on the window. The lightning flash passed. The alpaca stayed, staring at me. I crossed my arms, lifted my chin, and tried to ignore the pounding of my heart. "Shoo!" I said, waving my tentacles. "Go on, off with you. Or break the glass and try me. Go on. What's the point of this, otherwise? What are you doing?" The alpaca backed away, slowly vanishing into the darkness. I tooted. Thought so. When I crept back out into the corridor, the squid spider decided to follow me. He kept at a polite distance in the rear, hook claws feeling his way along the wall, hanging sideways. My own relief surprised me. The thing was incredibly weird and had once been piloted by a horrible mage, but right now it was the only other living thing I'd found in this cursed house. "I can't just keep thinking of you as that squid spider," I murmured as we crept back toward the front of the house, past the open doorways. "You need a name. I suppose that'll have to wait until you've communicated in some fashion." I glanced back at the thing, clinging to the edges of a door frame. "For now I don't know, you're more cat than dog. What do people call their cats? Marmalade? You're not marmalade-colored though, you're more like Marmite and curdled cream." "Marmite the spider, how does that sound?" Marmite did not reply. I decided it was a he, for now, though prepared to correct myself later, scissored his beak up and down, all eyes on me, hunched and close to the wall. I was reminded of a timid animal following its owner into a scary place. When we passed the open door to the den, a strange thing happened. First I glanced inside, just to check that Nicole hadn't reappeared in her armchair, but the room was still empty. Then, as I turned away, a door appeared in my peripheral vision, in the back wall of the room. Plain wood with a neat handle, like all the other doors in the house. "Oh, that's odd." But when I looked directly at it, the door wasn't there. I sighed and slipped one hand inside my squid skull mask, so I could pinch the bridge of my nose with exasperation. Marmite and I then commenced several fruitless minutes of trying to find the door again. Well, I did. Marmite just watched. Perhaps he wondered what on earth the little ape squid was up to, running her hands and tentacles all over the wall, hissing in frustration and taking her helmet off, putting it back on, taking it off again, and putting on all over again. Try as I might, the door was not there, not even invisible. There and gone again. Fine. "I give up," I said, stepping out of the room, and then the door appeared again in my peripheral vision. This time, I didn't move my head or my eyes, though I hissed with the stupidity of the moment. If I could edge all the way up to the door without looking directly at it, perhaps I could grab the handle and exit this absurd fake space. Then a shape moved across the door. Blonde hair, rounded shoulders, stomping with her walking stick, scowling and chewing her lips as she stared at a notepad in one hand. Evie. My heart leapt. And the door was gone. Evelyn wasn't there either. I forced myself to take a deep breath. If there is a mind behind this, I am going to give you such a telling off. I am really not in the mood for this. I've spent all morning watching demons fight and I am tired. I don't want to be doing this right now, I want to be at home, taking a nap or reading a book. I didn't waste any more time on the door that wasn't. Back to the corridor. Marmite scuttled along behind me. We almost reached the stairs before I noticed an extra door. And this one was not running away. It was opposite the stairs themselves, flush up against the door to the little cloakroom, identical to all the other doors in the house, plain wood painted an off-white cream color. That wasn't there before, I sighed, more irritated than spooked by now. Is this meant to be scary? The first one was a bait-and switch, but this one opens on a bottomless pit, right? This is dumb. What do you think, Marmite? Pretend we haven't seen it. Oh, I suppose it's a way deeper into this, whatever this is all meant to. The door opened and disgorged a woman being eaten by a blob monster. At least, that's what it looked like for the first split second. I recoiled like a cat faced with a snake, hissing at the top of my lungs and whipping all my tentacles forward in self-defense as I scrambled backward. I think I bumped into Marmite on the wall, because somebody or something helped catch and right me on my own 2 feet again so I could keep hissing. Miss Morel. Heather. My hiss died down to a pant of adrenaline and confusion as my eyes made sense of what I was looking at. Amanda Hopton waved at me awkwardly with her free hand, the one that was not engulfed in bubble servitor. Hello, I croaked, forcing my throat back into a human configuration with an effort of willpower. It felt like swallowing a pine cone. Sorry, I thought, I gestured with one tentacle at the collection of massive soap bubbles attached to Amanda's arm and head. One of Hringewindla's angels was perched on her like the world's largest parrot. Iridescent bubbles piled up around her head and neck, spilling over her shoulder, and clinging to her left arm, which was entirely buried within the shifting mass of the bubble creature, visible through the translucent layers, warped by multiple angles of refraction. Oh, Amanda reacted quite slowly, glancing over at her bulbous passenger. It's quite safe. I'm fine. I needed help, in all this confusion. Help, right? I cleared my throat again. Is that yours? She nodded past me, at Marmite, who was still clinging to the wall. In a manner of speaking, I sighed. Long story. I think he might be what you saw in the corridor earlier, but he's not responsible for all this. He's safe too. I think. Amanda made a low humming, nodding along, heavy-lidded eyes blinking slowly then snapping open to fix on Marmite. Yes. He is allowed to be here. I let out a big sigh, trying to straighten up and shake off the adrenaline. That door you came from, that wasn't there a moment ago. I peered over her shoulder. Oh. It was just another cloakroom, identical to the one I'd been in earlier. Same coats, same shoes, same boxes. Ah. Amanda turned, confused, the bubble servitor turning with her. She half closed the door with one hand, which revealed that the other door, the one to the cloakroom I'd been inside, was now nowhere to be seen. Blank wall. I sighed a great big sigh and wanted to put my face in my hands. Only my squid mask stopped me. There was another door, I said. It's gone now. Oh, yes, I've been experiencing that too, Amanda said, nodding along. New doors. Corridors all tangled, going in circles. It's awful. I'm so glad to see somebody else. Her voice held a mesmerized, floating quality, back in normal reality that was just how she sounded, but surrounded as we were now by cloying night and howling winds beyond the walls, the way she spoke almost gave me the creeps. I'd never been alone with Amanda before. I'd only met her twice. She possessed the same neat features and dark curls as her sister, but with significantly more gray in her hair and much heavier bags under her eyes. Oddly, I couldn't quite tell her age. She could have been in her 50s or her 30s, run down in some ways but preserved in others, as if she rarely saw the sun. She had more fat on her frame and more lines in her face, backed by a slack exhaustion that came from a lifetime of terrible stress or an acute period of no sleep. I suspected the former. I knew it well. But her eyes danced with alert intelligence. You've been experiencing all this as well, then? I asked. You left the den, went upstairs with Twill. What happened? Amanda nodded. The bubble servitor adjusted as she moved her head, a disgusting flowing motion of hundreds of tiny bubbles. To see my boys, yes. We went upstairs, but then I turned a corner and Twill was gone. I thought she was just doing something Twill-like, you know. Run off somewhere. She tried a smile, nervous and soft, like a puffball mushroom. Yes. It would be very Twill, doing that amid all this. But then my boys were missing too. And Gareth, he's my gentleman friend. He wouldn't leave the boys after I told him to stay with them, he simply wouldn't do that. And Bernard was gone, too. That's my dog. We'll find your children, I'm sure they're safe. I don't think this place is serious. Sort of. Amanda sighed. I'm afraid you and I both have better protection than most, Miss Morell. Heather? Heather is fine, I said. What is it? What's wrong? She really wasn't. The sleepy-eyed look, the strung-out exhaustion, the strange floating of her words. Her children were missing, wasn't she supposed to be in panic? Amanda nodded. I am fortified and protected in my hour of need. Fear would not help. The hand of my God is on me. Ah, I cleared my throat. Literally, yes. I apologize. We didn't do this, she said, though she didn't sound offended. I speak with the voice of my God, and this is not our doing. Well, it's not ours either. She nodded. I believe that. I shuffled my feet and tried to smile back. Not easy in this place. Behind me, Marmite was twitching and adjusting on the wall, as if listening to the sounds of the wind or the creaking of the beams. So we're all cut off, I said. But how have you and I bumped into each other? If we can replicate that, we can probably find everybody else. Maybe get out of here. Amanda smiled. I am receiving direct help. She wiggled her fingers inside the bubble servitor. But I don't think that's actually helping. You're the first I've found. All I've done is wander around this labyrinth. Labyrinth? All I've seen is the house, like normal. Save a phantom door or two. Amanda shook her head. It is a jumble. Well, not for me. Have you seen outdoors? Oh. Yeah. She cringed a little. That helped remind me she was still a person too, not just a mouthpiece for an outsider. I'm sorry, Heather. It's very strange talking to you through your mask, though it is very beautiful. I might not show it, but I am quite perfectly terrified right now, for my safety, for my boy's safety, for everyone else. I don't understand what's going on. It was only once I took off my squid skull mask that I realized how much security and comfort I'd been drawing from being cradled in metallic armor. Naked, exposed directly to the walls of the house and the wind beyond, uncovered and unprotected. I silently thanked the strange outside creature that had donated its remains, which had become my mask. Is that better? I asked Amanda. Thank you. Sorry. Don't mention it, I said automatically, frowning at her though I didn't mean to. If we work together, we may be able to find the others, she said slowly, slack-lipped and squinting. Or I am not unaware of your many blessings from the beyond. Can you go for help? When I didn't answer right away, Amanda swallowed. Heather. Amanda, am I speaking with you right now or well, him? Both, she said without hesitation. My God is in my head, all the time. I make no secret of this. He is present, he is listening, he speaks to me. But not through me, not directly. I chewed my lip, watching her carefully, trying to see into the backs of her eyes, brown pools like thick mud set in flesh the color of sunless fungus. Abyssal instinct whispered dark suggestions, ruthless suggestions. Maybe this woman was lying, maybe she was the bioluminescent lure before the jaws of the creature that held us in its jaw. Maybe this was all Hrinjwindla's trap, but he had none of the strength of Urinju. And he doesn't know what's going on? I asked. But my words came out like ice. Amanda must have read the look on my face. She swallowed hard. I am no puppet, I am loved. Especially so. Please don't repeat this in front of the others, especially Christine, she doesn't like to be reminded of it, but I am Hrinjwindla's special one, in this generation, this life. I am his closest. I have been with him since before I could speak. He is always with me, and he does not understand what is happening here. Please. I'm terrified too. I do want to believe you. He would not leave me in this as bait, Miss Morell. I reached out with a tentacle and brushed her arm, a subconscious gesture of connection and acceptance. Strangely enough, Marmite copied the gesture. Bony, segmented tentacles reached past me, hovering in the air. I don't have any choice but to trust you regardless, I said. The only other option would be to hurt you, I suppose. Which I won't do. But if this turns out to be a trick. I stared into her eyes, to make clear who was the intended recipient of my implied threat. My voice shook more than I wanted. Amanda nodded, a little jerky and shaken. I blew out a slow breath and retracted my tentacle. Marmite did the same, mimicking my action. However, I can't just leave, I said. It's too much of a risk. I quickly filled Amanda in on my assumption so far that my toxic presence might be the only thing stopping this trap from swallowing us, that Rain had suggested this is not intentional but instead some kind of natural phenomenon, and about where I'd found Marmite. Marmite? She echoed, blinking at me. Marmite. Provisionally. For now. I just needed something to call him. But when I explained where he'd come from originally, Amanda bit her lip, staring at his black-shadowed form clinging to the wall. As far as I'm aware, he's clean now, I said. I don't even know what he's doing here, he's basically just pneumosomatic life. A cami, yes, Amanda moved her head left and right, as if examining the squid spider from different angles. The bubble servitor attached to her head and arm did the same, much to my suppressed disgust. Ring, I stopped, cleared my throat, and decided not to try that pronunciation again. Your god really has no idea what is happening here. How we might get out. Amanda sighed, glancing down the spinal corridor of the house. Sometimes his thoughts are difficult to interpret correctly, even for me. But he is concerned about contamination. Infestation. Hidden germination. These words do not capture the concept he is worried about, but they are close enough. I do not have the right language for it, none of us do. Ah, I sighed. Well. Good try, regardless. He does think we should find the private eye again, Nicole Webb. Amanda hesitated, wetting her thin, cracked lips. He suggests that I allow one of his buds, she gestured with her left arm inside the bubble servitor, to clean her. Cold seeped into my belly. Clean her. Spiritually. Amanda held my gaze, guilty and pained. She knew exactly how that sounded. I think you should hold off on that, if we run into her. Please. Amanda didn't nod. She just looked away from me. Do you want to stick together, to try to find her? I would appreciate not doing this alone. Of course, I said, swallowing and forcing a polite nod. We best stick together now. I couldn't be certain, of course, but I think Amanda had just asked me to help her defy her god, without saying the words. If she found Nicole first, and alone, then her god was very interested in rooting around inside Nicole's head. Whatever it means to stick together in all this, Amanda said with an awkward smile. I suspect the maze will separate us again, the moment we're out of sight of each other. How is your god helping you, exactly? We might be able to work with that, somehow. Directions, of a sort. But even he is confused by the tangle now, by the extra doors, the corridors duplicated, the rooms that shouldn't be there. This is not within his understanding, as vast as his mind may be. I bit my bottom lip. I haven't seen any of that, just the house. All except the door you emerged from. Curious. Amanda tilted her head at me. The bubble servitor on her shoulders flowed with the motion, like a bag full of silt. You could find the detective in an instant though, could you not? I maybe. With the right maths. Cold fingers crept into my belly again. Behind me, Marmite eased backward along the wall, retreating with painful slowness. I've heard about what you can do, Amanda said. When she blinked, her eyelids were out of sync. From Twill. I think your friend, Rain, yes. She was right, and Hringewindla agrees. The detective was the start of this. She carried the infection in. If we can find her, we can diagnose. Identify. Trace. I took a step back as well. Abyssal instinct flared warning signs inside my head. You sound more certain than a moment ago. Amanda. This could all be over quite soon, if you would please. Stop, I snapped. Amanda flinched. She blinked several times, eyelids in sync once again. I'm sorry. Sorry, Just, stop. I swallowed hard. Abyssal instinct was screaming about lures and marine canyons and the giant things that lurked down there, waiting for prey to stray near to the edge. You're not very subtle, are you? Amanda gaped at me, gormless and lost. I'm sorry. I'm not talking to you, Amanda. Oh. I forced myself to let out a slow breath. Look, I understand you think Nicole is the cause of all this, but she's also our friend, and we're responsible for what happened. I'm not going to lead you to her if you're just going to scoop out her mind. If we find her and you try to overpower me, well, I paused, swallowing awkwardly. You know what I can do to your followers. And your angels. Amanda shook her head, shocked and frightened. Please, I won't, I don't mean to. I'm sorry, I sighed, running one hand over my face, trying not to shake so badly. Besides, I don't think I can just picture Nicole in my head and rotate the house like one of those puzzles full of ball bearings. It's never as simple as that. Don't think of a black cat, one tells oneself, and instantly one pictures a black cat, no matter how hard one tries. The negation of the object contains within itself the definition of the negated. The black hole defines itself against the background of stars. Observation does not fail when faced with an absence. Absence itself becomes definition. So for a moment, I pictured exactly what I described Nicole like a ball bearing in a puzzle, and how I might use hyperdimensional mathematics to rotate the dimensions around her, to bring her to us. And then, from behind Amanda and Marmite and I, came a scuff stumble of unsteady feet. Marmite whirled on the wall, backing away in fear, almost bumping into me. My tentacles fanned out with instinctive shock. Amanda gasped and her bubble servitor flowed upward, as if it was trying to make her look bigger too. Nicole Webb, Private Eye, stumbled out of the den and slumped against the wall. Salute and advance, and by all that is unkept, she said with weary relief, struggling to stay standing. But there's no window for delay, no time for entrenchment, no whistle of shell. You found her. Amanda sighed with relief. Detective, hello. Nicole, right, I murmured. We found you. There was just one problem: I hadn't actually executed any equations. I hadn't performed any hyperdimensional mathematics. I had not done this. But there was no time to stop and think. Amanda was already stepping forward, maybe to take Nicole by the arm and help her stand up, or maybe to inject bubble servitor into her skull through her ear canal. The bubble servitor started to crane forward on Amanda's shoulder like a cresting wave, flowing over itself with naked interest. I shouldered past Amanda, half turning with a display of my tentacles thrust out to block her way, my left arm showing the fractal. The bubble servitor recoiled and Amanda stumbled. I groped for Nicole with my other 3 tentacles. Nicole, of course, could not see the wordless confrontation. The detective yelped in surprise as I dragged her to her feet with unseen limbs, grabbing for my physical, human hand when I reached her. Amanda stood there with a cowed, blinking expression. But the bubble servitor on her shoulder roiled and rocked, like a giant unshelled mollusk working itself into a frenzy. Nikki, hi, Nikki, I said, all in a rush. It's okay, it's just my invisible tentacles picking you up. It's just me. Nicole gave me such a look when I said that. I sighed and rolled my eyes. At least she didn't let go of me though, hooking her arm around my shoulders so she could stand up almost straight. What now, Miss Morel? Amanda asked. What do we do now? We were at an impasse, an unspoken standoff, facing each other across this wooden corridor, myself and Hringwindla, surrounded by the whipping, whistling winds, and the pressing night beyond the walls. Amanda had gone glassy-eyed, barely even here. To my side, poor Marmite was cramming himself into the junction between wall and ceiling, unwilling to run but trying to stay clear of the confrontation between the avatar of a crippled god and the daughter of the eye. "We can't just stand here all night," Amanda continued when I didn't answer. "It isn't really night," I said. "Keep up the facade. Play along that we're not in conflict. You know what I mean. I'm not handing Nicole over to you." "Parley and Sally," Nicole blurted out. "A hilltop world of whippoorwills and stone circles. Which way to Canterbury?" "I'm not going to harm her, I promise." Amanda sighed, frowning in a long-suffering kind of way, the way I would have frowned this time last year. "We need to get rid of this, clean away the cobwebs," and she was the start. On her shoulder, the bubble servitor suddenly split itself into 6 distinct strands, feelers formed by roiling soap bubbles. They fanned out to touch the walls, the floor, and the ceiling, creeping toward us in a web that extended from its main body. "I should slip," I said. Amanda stopped and tilted her head at me. The bubble servitor kept inching toward us. Nicole frowned harder, panting with the effort of pointing her feet in the right direction. "I thought you said you didn't want to try, in case." I wet my lips carefully, trying to consider my options. I could not let Hringwindla get his bubbles on Nicole. The way she clung to me proved that much she did not consent. If he had wanted to harm her for some other reason, then he'd had hours to do that before we'd arrived. I didn't know how to read the mind of an outsider, let alone through a human avatar, but I didn't think I was being lied to. "If Nicole is the origin of this, then removing her from the house may unravel the effect," I said. "I can take her outside." The bubble servitor paused. "That may work," said Amanda. "I am afraid of not being able to get back," I explained. "If this is some separate, unconnected space, I might not be able to return, not cleanly. But it's worth trying. And if this is a trap, if I am the only thing stopping it from closing, then I leave the responsibility to you." Amanda nodded slowly. Her eyes were full of fog. "Do I have your word that you will help my friends, if anything happens when I leave?" I asked. "And I'm not talking to you." Amanda blinked twice. Behind the glassy, cloudy orbs of her eyes, a vast shape adjusted itself, a leviathan bulk seen through a crack in the earth's crust. "You have my word," something else said with her mouth. "Exit stage left?" Nicole asked. She might be talking nonsense, but her tone was terrified. "It's safe," I said to her, our faces uncomfortably close. "I mean, it feels bad, yes. And being outside at all feels weird. But Rain's been through it, she's a totally unaltered human being like you, and she's fine." Nicole gave me a very dubious frown. I sighed and rolled my eyes. "That's just Rain being Rain." "Imbriglicated," Nicole muttered. "I will stay here with my angels," Amanda said. "I will attempt to find your friends. I think that's best. If you did come outside, well, I don't know what that might do to your connection with your god." Amanda shrugged. "Hringwindla is with me always." I did my best to ignore her fanaticism, glancing up at Marmite instead. He was now firmly wedged into the ceiling, wrapped in his shadow-soft membranes like an upside-down blanket fort. "Do you want to come with me? Get out of this?" I asked. Marmite pulled his segmented tentacles even tighter, but then his cone eyes swiveled to look at the extended tendrils from the bubble servitor. "That's a no, I presume?" Amanda asked. "I don't speak any Kami language." "Neither do I," I sighed. Amanda looked briefly confused, blinking at me. "But oh." Marmite slowly crept down the wall, took up a position behind me, and tapped the back of my thigh with a segmented bone tentacle. "A yes." "A yes," I said. Well then. If this works, I'll be back in a matter of minutes. Be safe, I suppose. Amanda nodded politely and stepped back, as if hyperdimensional mathematics had a minimum blast radius. The bubble servitor flowed after her, deciding to let us go. Nothing else for it, no time for second thoughts, no other preparation needed. This was the only way to defuse the situation. Hold on tight and close your eyes, I said to Nicole. This can be stressful. Also, I may vomit on the other side, so watch out. You too, Marmite. The squid spider wrapped his grip around my leg. The familiar old equation spun up inside my head, rising from the inky depths like a machine preserved in sticky, corrosive black oil. Each piece slammed into place, red-hot with speed and precision, burning a path through my brain. The house folded up, shrank to a point, and stepped sideways.